Today, I want to look at three questions. Why did this war between the United States and Iran start? How will this war end? And what will happen after this war ends? And to answer these three questions, we need to discuss the nature and structure of our reality. And the first thing you need to understand, which is very hard, is that our world is a hallucination. It's a collective fantasy, all right? So to understand this idea, let's look at Plato's allegory of the cave, okay? Plato's allegory of the cave. And so in this cave, we're deep inside the earth and it's dark. There's some light coming in, but not much. And we're all chained in a line together, okay? And there's about 1 million of us. We're on the floor and we're chained to the ground. And we can't really move. We can't get up. We can't move around. Even our necks are shackled. So we can't turn around and see the world around us. Okay, so there's about 1 million of us all sitting down and staring at a wall together. Okay, and this wall is blank. Behind us is great fire. And there are people around this fire, okay? We don't know who they are, but they are free to move around. And what they do is this: they take puppets, and then they reflect the puppets onto the wall, creating shadows. And we're mesmerized by these shadows because before we're staring at a blank wall, and now there are these moving shadows. And we think these shadows are real because we don't know any better. So we give them names. Okay, we give them names and we create a language in order to tell stories about these shadows. And this becomes really our collective reality, okay? So another way of saying this is that reality is a collective conscious which is really a hallucination. Okay? All right. So there are certain things about this reality that we need to keep in mind. Okay? So first of all, what's really important to understand is that what creates this reality is our conscious, our imagination, our perception. Not anyone else, us, okay? So in other words, the wealth in the society is our consciousness. The amount of thought we put into something. And so let me give you an example. Let's just say that I were to ask you to make a vase to sell on the marketplace, okay? While you're making this vase, if you are listening to music, if you are chatting with a friend, if you're not fully conscious and focused and attentive about making this vase, it won't be very good. But if you are completely focused on creating the most beautiful vase you can, and you're not distracted by anything, then this vase will be beautiful and therefore more valuable in the marketplace. Okay? So in other words, it is our conscious attention that creates wealth in this world. And it is really money or capital that extracts and stores our consciousness and turns it into wealth. All right? So that's a really important concept that most people don't understand, but you need to understand this if we are to understand the nature of reality itself. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to understand. This reality is structured to extract our consciousness in order to create wealth for the elite, for these people. Okay, and historically, there have been different mechanisms that you can use in order to extract and store wealth. All right, so you have maybe religion, okay? And so think of pyramids, right? Because pyramids in Egypt are able to focus your attention and motivate you to do certain actions, okay? To engage in religious worship. but really any temples. So that's one form of capital. Another form of capital, of course, is the idea of stories. Homer, right? Homer is the father of Greek civilization because he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, which is able to focus people's attentions and drive them to great things. Then you, of course, in today's world, you have the Bible. And the main mechanism to extract and store wealth in today's world, of course, is the US dollar. Now, but there's another force that's being created in order to replace the US dollar, and this is called artificial intelligence. All right, so what we'll discuss later on is that there's actually a war going on for the soul of humanity, for the human consciousness between the US dollar, the old world order, and artificial intelligence, the new world order, okay? But I want you to keep this in mind. All right, so that's the first thing I want you to understand. Second thing that I need you to understand is that these people, we don't know who they are, okay? But what we do know is that they don't force us to do anything. There's not enough of them, okay? The way they maintain power is through manipulation and trickery and deception. And we know this because in Plato's Allegory of the Cave, one day, for whatever reason, one guy decides, you know what? I feel as though this is not the real world. I feel as though there's something outside this cave. So he or she starts messing around with the chains and realizes, these aren't chains. These are just like ropes. I can just like get rid of them. And this chain around my neck, it's like a ribbon. I can snap it off. And he doesn't know why he does this, but he does this. He does do this. And when he does this, they don't even care. Like, whatever, man, do whatever you want. And so he releases himself. He's blind because he's been in the dark all his life, but somehow he recognizes that there's this light, okay, outside the cave. And he is compelled to this light. So he's walking, stumbling to this light. And again, they are like watching him. They're like, we don't care. Do whatever you want, man. They don't stop him. He goes out into the light, and now he's outside, and it's pure light, okay? He's left the cave, and at first he's in pain, and he struggles to reorientate himself to this new world, but then eventually he falls in love with this world. It's a beautiful world, and it's like for him, heaven. And he's like, oh my God, this is the real world. The cave is a fake world that we created ourselves. Let me go back there and tell everyone about the truth. And when he goes back, the elite, don't stop him. Like, whatever you want, man, do whatever you want, okay? So they who are in power, you think they have an army, you think they have magic, and you think that they're evil, but really, all their power rests on our belief in their power, okay? They themselves don't have any power except to manipulate us. Okay, that's something you need to understand. Now, the third thing you need to understand is that even though this is a fake world, people don't know this. They think it's real. In fact, they believe it is so real that they are willing to die for it. So that when this man who's seen heaven, who's seen the truth, who's come back to tell everyone, these chains that you have aren't real. We can break free and escape into the real world. If he dares to tell them this, together they will kill him. Okay, do you understand? So in other words, the reality is a hallucination. It's created by us, but we fall in love with it. We're so attached to it psychologically and emotionally that if anyone tells us it's fake, we kill them for it. Okay? So it's these three things I want you to keep in mind as we explore our world. Because our world is actually just Plato's cave. All right, so let me show you how. All right. So, you need a force in order to create this reality, to chain us together, okay? And this force, of course, is called the American Empire. All right, the empire. Basically, just the military.
Pay attention, TJ. Pay attention. This is how the world works.
But they themselves don't really want to control this world because they're an army, okay? So what they do is they allow the creation of a financial order, a global financial order, which then constructs the game that we play, okay? And these people then construct the reality that we live in, okay? So this is the global financial order. And what is this global financial order? Well, at the very top is something called the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, okay? The central bank of central banks. Below them is the World Bank, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, which controls the rules of the global financial order. And then below them are something called the central banks, okay? So the Federal Reserve in the United States, the the People's Bank of China in China, okay? The Bank of England in England, okay? So together they create the global financial order. And what is the global financial order? It's just to use the US dollar as a main mechanism of wealth extraction and wealth storage, okay? Really simple. The US dollar. Another way of understanding these people is to think of them as the game masters, okay? The ones above us who's constructed the game and controlling the rules of the game as we play it, okay? The game masters. Okay, so once the game has been created with the rules and incentives, now we can play the game. And this game is called the global economy. All right? So when China trades with the United States, when you go off to Europe on vacation, you're all participating in a game created by the financial order, okay? And the purpose of this this global economy is to have everyone play as much as possible so that wealth can be transferred from the world to the United States, the powers that be, okay? And they do this through two mechanisms. The first is the US dollar. So every time you use the US dollar, you're actually paying a tax to America because America has the power to print as much US dollars as it wants, okay? And the second way that it does this is through something called price hierarchy, okay? A price hierarchy. So the global economy is divided into tiers, okay? So resources are considered the cheapest, even though in reality it should be the most expensive, right? Because resources are limited, they're finite. Above resources, of course, is manufacturing. And above manufacturing is knowledge economy. And then the highest is finance, okay? Basically the game masters. All right, so and as we can see, once with this price hierarchy in place, what we can do now is divide the world according to the specialties, okay? So resource, of course, would be Russia. Russia, the Middle East, the GCC, okay? Saudi Arabia, these places, okay? So these places provide resources. Manufacturing then would be China, right? Knowledge would be Europe and the Five Eyes, okay? Basically the Anglosphere, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Britain, and then finance, of course, the United States. Okay? Sorry. The United States. All right, so as you can see, this is a system that benefits the United States and its allies to the detriment of China and Russia. Okay? But this is how the game is structured. Of course, if the United States doesn't like you, what it can do is not allow you to play this game. And these countries, of course, would be North Korea and Iran, among other countries, okay? So China and Russia isn't happy about the system, but at least they get to play. Iran and North Korea are not even allowed to play the game of the global economy. All right? Now, of course, you can't have people believing that, okay, this entire global economy is structured so that the West can steal resources from everyone else, okay? So what you do is you create another layer called the rules-based international order. Okay, multilateral organizations, which includes the UN and the WTO, okay, World Trade Organization. Okay, this is called the rules-based international order. But it's really controlled by the empire, okay? So all these are just basically shadows on the wall that the empire is creating, projecting, okay? To fool us into behaving the way the empire wants. All right, so now that you have the system in place, what you need to do is indoctrinate people into believing that the system is fair, just, and good, okay? And then you do that through three mechanisms. These three mechanisms, of course, are education, media, and culture, right? What is education? Well, schools, guys, and universities, academia. You think that you go to university to learn knowledge. No, you don't. You go to university to be brainwashed into believing that this system is not just fair, but actually what really makes this system work is the rules-based national order, okay? You don't even think about empire. So that's education. Then, of course, you have media, which is CNN, BBC, New York Times. Each time you read an article, you think you're receiving news. You're not receiving news. You're being brainwashed into believing that this order is fair, just, and appropriate, okay? A phrase that you'll keep on hearing over and over is rules-based national order. Okay, but it's not a rules-based national order.
And this is what TJ cannot conceptually recognize. And Hodge twins and all these other guys.
It's Plato's cave. It's a deception. And the last, of course, is culture, which is Hollywood. And, you know, television shows, sitcoms, okay, things that you absorb every day. There's high culture and there's low culture. All right, so these are three mechanisms in which this order is basically indoctrinated into everyone, so that you don't even know this is a deception, okay? You believe that this is reality itself. And this is all to create values and norms. Okay, just the way you see the world, which allows for the creation of a legal structure. So that if you break the rules, it's not that the elite will come after you. They don't have to come after you because everyone else will come after you. Okay? If you're that guy who discovers that this is all deception, they'll kill you. Okay? Not the elite, but the people around you will kill you because you're breaking their fantasy. Okay? You're destroying their fantasy. All right? So this is a very effective system. The problem, though, is that you need to spread the system, okay? So there's three problems, okay? First of all, you have to protect this system, the status quo. Then you have to spread this system as well, okay? And then you also need to justify this system. And you do that through three transnational systems, three transnational organizations. And these are, okay, first, of course, is intelligence. What is intelligence? Spies, okay? Their job is to infiltrate other nations' elites and co-opt them into the system. That's what their job is, okay? That's what intelligence does. Then you have crime. Crime just engages in the most profitable enterprises, which includes, of course, drugs, human trafficking, and something called money laundering, okay? And this is a way to incentivize the global elite to work together, okay? So that's the first two. And then there's one more mechanism called science. Now you think that science is about pursuing the truth. No, it's not, okay? Science is fundamentally about finding evidence to justify and protect the status quo. Okay, that's why science is fundamentally materialistic. Okay, all right, and so we have to remember, like, this system is trying to create values, right? And these three major values is something called the open society. Okay, what is open society? It's just basically globalization, multiculturalism, DEI, right? Diversity is good. Why is it good? Because it's good. We don't know. It's good. Okay, do you understand? They never provide a reason, but it's always, well, you don't believe it, it means you're a racist, which is bad. Okay, so open society. Second is the idea of privatization. okay, or what we call neoliberalism or free market, meaning that governments suck at what they do. Therefore, you should allow private entrepreneurs to control everything. Okay, and this idea of neoliberalism. Again, there's not much evidence to support this, but if you don't believe this, it means you're a communist, okay? Which is bad, by the way. And the last thing, of course, is consumerism. Okay? So consumerism is just like, how do you prove your value in life? How do you pursue purpose and meaning in life? Buy things, man! Okay? And then put it on Instagram so that people can like it, you know? That's the value of life, man. Make as much money as possible, and then buy a yacht, get a super hot girlfriend, and then broadcast it on Instagram, and then you're a hero, okay? Of course, what people don't discuss is that this system is making people lonely, miserable, depressed, suicidal. But, well, it's because they're not taking enough drugs, right? If you're depressed, you should take antidepressants, and that will solve the issue, right? Okay. So, because intelligence, crime, and science are above the nation state, okay, you need other mechanisms to actually operate these three things. And so, what allows for the system to work is a collection of elites, okay? And you can break them down into three groups. First, you have transnational capital. So think of, finance, transnational capital. Then you have secret societies, and then you have families, okay? So elite families. All right, and these three organizations themselves are bounded by something called the occult. And we'll discuss this later on, okay? The occult. The occult is just basically hidden, secret knowledge, not available to people, that comes from three places. Other places as well, but we'll look at three places, okay? Hermetic philosophy, the Bible, and the Kabbalah, okay? We'll discuss this later on. Don't worry too much about the occult right now. I'll show you what the occult is later on. But this is how the system works. All right, so there's certain questions about this. The first question is, okay, well, if this is true, why is this system separate from this system, right? Why not just say that the occult is the basis of everything, and then you have the elite, and then you have science, intelligence, crime, and then you have the empire, okay? And the reason why is this is really important for you guys to understand. This is the parasite, okay? This is the parasite. It doesn't actually create anything. All it does is suck up value, extract value, okay? And this is the host. So in fact, these are two separate systems, right? This is the host, and this is the parasite. Then your next question would be, okay, let's just assume this is true. What evidence is there that this actually works? Because there should be people that operate this system, right? Well, I will give you some names, okay? All right, so if it is true that this system is the way it is, there should be individuals in place that operate this system, right? Well, I'll give you some names. I'll give you two names. Jeffrey Epstein and Jared Kushner. Okay, and I'll explain who they are as we go along. And these families, how about the Rothschilds? Secret Society, Chabad Lubavitch. All right. And you're like, this is all conspiracy. This can't be true. Well, it's all true. And I will give you the evidence that this is all true later on. By the way, some of you will be like, they're all Jews, man. So why do they say the Jews rule the world? Well, because the evidence that we have implicates these people who are Jewish. But there are other people who are more powerful, who are able to maintain themselves in the shadows, okay? So it's not really fair to say that it's a Jewish conspiracy, okay? I think this explanation, this system is much more complicated than just saying it's all Jews, all right? All right, so now what I want to discuss is the problems of this system, All right? And once you understand the problems of this system, then we can understand why this war in Iran is happening, where it's going, and what this means for the world, okay? So there's certain problems with this system I want you to notice. The first major problem is all this is based on empire, the perception of empire. And
so we're going to stop him for now, and we're going to flip over to two things that we're dealing with right now as we speak. All right, so what this is, share this tab instead. So this will be an explanation as to why we're doing the stuff we're doing with Venezuela, Honduras, the Suez Canal, Cuba, and whatever that other country that was trying to make the other, that's Honduras, right? So those things were all supposed to be ours. And what happened is the Civil War started. And the Civil War stopped our progress of taking over the Caribbean all the way down to essentially Venezuela. And America was supposed to have from the south to Venezuela all of that stuff. We weren't going to take Mexico because the Habsburg family were running shop. They had tried to be emperor for a little bit, and they're like, "Well, we probably shouldn't do this." So then they went to the shadows, but they never left. The Habsburgs never left Mexico. And Abraham Lincoln created the IRS to fund his Civil War and the expansion of the West. So what that did is Abraham Lincoln stopped the Southern powers from taking over the Caribbean. And then what ended up happening during all this, the French used to have the French Indies. It didn't last too long. It got absorbed. A bunch of Jews bought their boats and shit like that. And the Dutch and the Brits. And the Dutch and the Brits still to this day control the Caribbean. Like the Dutch, their country are Caribbean islands. Those are like states. And the Brits, like you got Jamaica and all that stuff, these islands that either the church, the French, or the British, one of those three are the ones that sold the island to Jeffrey Epstein. That it's their shit. All right. And then Abraham Lincoln did his grand conspiracy, and he made the United States of America. Abraham Lincoln made the United States of America. It wasn't him, but it was the railroad mafia. It was the people who owned everything that cut down the trees, that set the paths to lay the railroads. It was the brick mason people. They even bribed all the bricklayers of the South who was building all these boats, or excuse me, all these islands in the Caribbean and Key West and Guantanamo and shit like that. They basically bribed and murdered everyone who was making all the bricks to stop working with the South. And this it's a fascinating thing. And one way to get to understand it, this is the report of the Secretary of the Navy from 1865. And in here, it goes over everything that they have, everything that these people were making. It has the maps of the bases that they were making. And all of a sudden, they disappeared. Well, they didn't disappear. They just started doing shit up north. Marco Rubio's family is involved with all this stuff. It goes back a long time. And now, while, because we've gone from the Vesica Pisces, the vulva, and now we're in the age of Aquarius. And so religiosity, theosophy likes to hold shit for 1,000 years, while the common man gets 99 years, 60 years, 40 years, 30 years, 20 years. That's all the common man gets. And so you're going to have these grand battles from a religious standpoint, and all the money makers who sometimes aren't even religious, playing this giant gamble. And we're kind of, if Trump gets what he wants, we will have Venezuela, we will have Greenland, we'll have huge contract deals with Canada that do not involve Europe and China. And it's just all these foundational steps that are going to hold us over for the next 100 years. Here is a video of a lot of the problems, and also Jews are involved. These synagogues that were in Tennessee and West Virginia and New York, these early synagogues, they're also involved with fucking with Abraham Lincoln too, because they got the contracts when all the railroads expanded. So let's pay attention to this.
Howdy y'all, welcome back. Thank you for being here. To conquer the Golden Circle was the objective of a secret society formed in America in roughly 1854. The Knights of the Golden Circle formed under the supervision of the richest men in America and Europe to create a new country known as the Golden Circle, Spanish Círculo Dorado, where slavery would have been legal. The country would have been centered in Havana, Cuba as the capital, and it would have consisted of the entire southern United States as well as the Golden Circle of territories, which included all of Mexico that was to be divided into 25 new slave states, as well as all of Central America, northern South America, as well as all of Cuba, all of Haiti, and all of the Dominican Republic, as well as every island of the Caribbean, for a total golden circle of over 2,400 miles in diameter. Today, this Golden Circle secret organization is described in the current narrative as lacking significant funding in the 19th century, and their history is said to be obscure at best. Yet, as we peel back this narrative, we see the Knights of the Golden Circle could have easily been part of the secret societies, the very Masons we see in the early photographs, who appeared to be inheriting much of the country. But let's look at the beginning. The Knights of the Golden Circle, according to the narrative, have their origins in three main events or ideas, with the secret society being founded on July 4th, 1854. Remarkably, from the three things said to have led to the creation of the Knights of the Golden Circle, two of the three events occurred well after the founding of the Knights, and the third was a major ongoing conflict. Furthermore, alleged claims that the Knights of the Golden Circle were founded the whole way back in 1834 were made in published exposés in 1863. Initially, the Knights of the Golden Circle formed from a failed attempt to annex Cuba, which became known as the Ostend Manifesto. However, this manifesto, sent to Congress in October of 1854, was drafted months after the alleged founding of the Knights of the Golden Circle, and seemingly couldn't be a cause for the founding of this society. But I digress. The Ostend Circular or Ostend Manifesto declared that the U.S. should purchase Cuba from Spain, and if they refused, the U.S. should declare war. Cuba was seen as key to expanding slaveholder control at this time, and the Ostend Manifesto was then drafted up by American ministers who were sent to Europe, including Pierre Solé, the minister to Spain, James Buchanan, the future president and then minister to Britain, and John Young Mason, the minister to France. They met at the behest of Secretary of State William Marcy, who sought to annex Cuba for the pro-democratic, pro-slavery presidency of Franklin Pierce. The ministers first met secretly in Ostend, Belgium in early 1854 before finalizing their draft in Aachen, Prussia in October of that same year. We're told interest in Cuba had begun with John Quincy Adams and Thomas Jefferson, but eventually, during the presidency of Jefferson, he enacted a no-transfer policy with the Spanish Empire. We're told the U.S. then sought to keep Cuba out of the control of other world powers, but did not immediately seek to annex it. However, Cuba was of special interest to the Southern Democrats, who, after seeing an onslaught of immigrants arrive to the northern states, had lost their balance of power in the House of Representatives. Not only would annexing Cuba expand their slaveholding domain, but it would retroactively add more representatives in Congress and the House of a pro-Southern rationale. Under President James K. Polk, Congress, using an offer that was drafted up by then Secretary of State and later President James Buchanan, the United States offered $100 million to purchase Cuba, but was quickly denied. And Buchanan is quoted as saying Spain would rather see Cuba at the bottom of the ocean than to see it transferred to another world power. The Whig administration that followed Polk's did not pursue Cuba. However, when Franklin Pierce took office in 1853, he made it one of his goals to annex the country. Quote, Cuba is as necessary to the North American Republic as any of its present members, and that it belongs naturally to that great family of states of which the Union is the providential nursery.
The little pill with a big story to tell.
Jardiance plays a role in my story, too.
End quote. News of the Ostend Manifesto ostensibly fractured the Democratic Party, leading to the founding of many obscure and short-lived political parties in America, like the Know Nothing Party. Another theorized cause for the Knights of the Golden Circle, who were founded in 1854, is the Filibuster War, also known as the National Campaign of 1856 and 1857. Again, you can see how this timeline doesn't exactly add up. In this incredible narrative, we're told one person, William Walker, brought a small private army to Nicaragua in 1855, seizing control of the country 1 year later and installing himself as the president. Again, take all of this history with a grain of salt.
It was Nicaragua that I was talking about. So the other Suez Canal is the canal that motherfuckers all the way back in the 1800s have been trying to build. And it hasn't been finalized, but it has been funded by China for the last 20 or 30 years. So China has been trying to make the Nicaraguan Suez Canal thing ever since these motherfuckers have been trying to do it. And I'm sure there's been some intermediaries in the meantime, which have probably been Spain, motherfucking London, Brussels, Paris, and Rome, because all the Catholics took over all of these areas and they were trying to build so many fucking churches. And isn't it weird that we stopped building these brick badass fucking military bases in the South and they disappeared and they went north, but at the same time, all these bricked churches were being made. So we stopped building the forts, and then all these churches started popping up motherfucking everywhere. And who sits on the throne of Jerusalem? King Felipe, the king today of Spain. And he's hanging out with the fucking Pope.
But we're told Nicaragua had gained independence from the United Provinces of Central America in roughly 1838. However, this did not free the region from conflict. With the beginning of the 1850s and the California gold rush, thousands sought to head west, and they sought alternate routes, which we're told brought these settlers to Nicaragua. However, as Great Britain heavily patrolled this area, and since the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, we're told neither the United States nor Britain would claim definitive control of Nicaragua in hopes of building a mutually beneficial canal. However, a divide arose between the independent liberal and independent conservative parties of Nicaragua, which culminated in an all-out civil war by 1854. Here is where it gets really strange. We're told the Democratic or Liberal Party of Nicaragua was losing traction, and they employed the services of William Walker, a well-known soldier of fortune, to organize a militia group. Diving into this William Walker character further, he is very interesting. Does this look like a military fighting man to you? How is this one of the most savage privateers of the 1850s? We're told William Walker was born in 1824 in Nashville, Tennessee, and was the grandson of Lipscomb Norvell, a famous American Revolutionary War officer. And Walker's uncle was John Norvell, founder of the Philadelphia Inquirer. We're also told that William Walker was engaged to a woman once, but she passed away young and he died childless. Walker was said to have graduated in the top 1% of his class from the University of Nashville at the age of 14. By age 19, he had graduated from the prestigious University of Pennsylvania with his medical degree. He then continued his studies in Scotland and then Germany before moving to New Orleans, Louisiana. From here, he traveled to San Francisco in 1849, and this is where it gets really interesting. At the age of 25, he worked as the editor of the San Francisco Herald. He was also said to have dueled at least 3 people at this time and won. Walker then formed a small militia in San Francisco and attempted to invade Sonora for the state of Arizona. In 1853, Walker then traveled to Mexico to seek approval for establishing his own colony, which was quickly denied. We're then told William Walker spent the next few months gathering men before traveling to Baja California with a militia of roughly only 45 men. Somehow, William Walker then captured the capital of Baja California at that time, La Paz, declaring himself the president of the newly founded Republic of Lower California, and his lawyer and law partner, Henry Watkins, was declared vice president. Walker then relocated the capital to Cabo San Lucas and declared his kingdom part of the larger Republic of Sonora. When the Mexican government sent numerous troops, Walker quickly retreated back to California and was indicted for violating the Neutrality Act of 1794. All charges were dismissed, and we're told since no interoceanic route existed from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean at this time, and the Transcontinental Railroad also did not exist, we're told for numerous decades the largest trade route from New York to San Francisco ran through Nicaragua. Essentially, boats sailed the Atlantic to the San Juan River and then across Lake Nicaragua before entering stagecoaches that would take them to the Pacific coast, where they would enter ships that would then head to San Francisco. This entire means of transportation from Atlantic to Pacific in Nicaragua was controlled and exploited by the Accessory Transit Company, owned by Cornelius Vanderbilt. When civil war was declared in Nicaragua in 1854, the Democratic Party, as I mentioned, hired Walker to help retake the country. Interestingly, Walker employed Charles Frederick Henningsen, who was a veteran of the Hungarian Revolution and the Circassian War in Tartaria.
I didn't even think I was at risk of shingles. I was wrong. Talk to your doctor today.
With the latest Galaxy from Verizon, you can swipe a whole new look.
By October 13th, Walker was said to have taken control of the government of Nicaragua, declaring himself president, which was later legitimized by U.S. President Franklin Pierce. As Walker attempted to seize control of the functions of Nicaragua, Walker had 2 people, C.K. Garrison and Charles Morgan, who worked for Vanderbilt. They came to him looking to double-cross Vanderbilt if Walker would seize control of the Accessory Transit Company and install them as president and vice president. When Walker did this, we're told that Cornelius Vanderbilt hired a secret private militia to retake Nicaragua, backed by the Costa Rican government and hundreds of thousands of dollars of his own private funds. A key role was then said to have been played by the Costa Rican army in unifying the other Central American armies to fight against Walker and the filibusters. The filibusters were said to be rich Americans who sought to illegally establish new colonies in Central and South America on behalf of the United States in an act of manifest destiny that was not approved by Congress. Walker surrendered by May of 1857. When Walker returned home, he was considered to be a hero by most, and he was repatriated. However, when Walker publicly blamed his defeat and his loss of Nicaragua on the U.S. Navy, it divided public opinion. When Walker attempted to set off for Nicaragua again in late 1857, he was arrested by the U.S. Home Squadron of the Navy and returned to the United States. However, the Navy's actions of detaining a private citizen caused much controversy, and many saw it as an abuse of William Walker's rights. Walker then wrote a detailed account of his time in Nicaragua, which he published in 1860. That same year, he gathered yet another militia and made yet another journey to the region, landing in Honduras. Here, Walker was met by wealthy British clients who hoped to back him in forming an exclusively English-speaking but not British government. We're told that Walker agreed, and just days later, he was arrested by Noel Salmon of the British Royal Navy. Instead of returning William Walker home to the United States as ordered under law, we're told Salmon handed Walker over to the Honduran government, who charged him with piracy and filibustering before sentencing him to death. Walker's passing in 1860 was said to be a massive contributing factor in convincing many Southerners of the desirability of creating an independent slaveholding empire, leading to the outbreak of the Civil War. But these aspirations were also said to have envisioned this slaveholding capital being in the tropical Latin America, which leads us nicely into the Knights of the Golden Circle. However, before getting into that, there's also the third event that was said to have led to the founding of these knights. And this was something that occurred essentially continuing through the outbreak of the Civil War. And that was the call for the full annexation of Mexico, also known as the All of Mexico movement. Origins and exact founders of this movement are unclear, as it has never been properly defined, but beginning with the founding fathers in 1776, there have been calls for the annexation of the South, including Mexico. Annexation of Mexico was considered one of the most important and the most controversial aspects of Manifest Destiny, and until the 1850s, we're told in the current narrative, these movements to annex Mexico simply did not gain enough traction in the public or in Congress. Yet, when the American troops conquered Mexico City during the Mexican-American War, there was a renewed hope that came to the South, where their dreams of annexing Mexico and forming a massive slaveholding kingdom might come to fruition. Before Polk took presidency in 1845, the U.S. had also just annexed Texas. Looking to legitimize these new borders, Polk was said to have sent troops to the Rio Grande River, the disputed new border for Texas. From 1845 onward, almost universally, the Democrats agreed that annexing Mexico was the only possible option to find peace. But secretly, many of these Democrats may have looked to create a slaveholding kingdom that would have eventually superseded the United States. In the end, according to the mainstream narrative, the American public refused the ideas of accepting, quote, non-whites into their union, and this was detailed in a rather immature speech by John C. Calhoun to Congress in 1848. Now let's bring this full circle, excuse my pun, into the Knights of the Golden Circle. The Knights of the Golden Circle were founded on July 4th, 1854 by George Washington Lafayette Bickley. However, the history here, as I mentioned earlier, is said to be obscure, but let's dissect it. Some sources say the Knights of the Golden Circle were founded in Cincinnati, Ohio, while others claim Lexington, Kentucky. What we do know is that the lodges or meeting places for this secret society were known as the castles. Now, the current narrative basically claims this group never held significant power and only had scattered membership throughout the United States, claiming Bickley himself fled the North around the end of the 1850s in severe debt, looking to consolidate his debt by gaining financing and support for an expedition he claimed would capture and conquer Mexico. The current narrative claims that the Knights of the Golden Circle was a rather small group with relatively little power, and they make the founder Bickley himself in the narrative out to be a man on the run.
And so we're talking about the 1800s to the 1850s. Let's take a gander at Maximilian the First of the Habsburgs. So it was the reason why we never took over Mexico is because the Habsburgs had already shoved their fucking tentacles in this country. He ended up getting killed, and then you had the Pablo Garcia guy take over. But they were essentially, this institution was essentially still funded by the Habsburgs and Spain and all the people who owned the boats. So it was the Habsburg who prevented us from taking over. And then they ended up learning their lesson and just going into the shadows. And what's hilarious is he met with Napoleon, right? And it was the Emperor of France, France Louis, ended up coming to pay swords and all that. And then you had Napoleon's great nephew created like the FBI. And then you had the Lafayette family, the Lafayette people taking over like Louisiana and Georgia and Alabama and all that shit. And then they ended up, that's why you got Lafayette everywhere. So all these French powers are like just flooding New York, Connecticut, specifically the New Haven area, while the South is trying to get a handle on Mexico. But at the whole time, the Habsburgs, the Austrian Empire, the Napoleon family, and then the person, Napoleon's mortal enemy, the Lafayettes, even though they're always apparently around each other all the time, it's there, it's evident what they were doing. And then you end up having the IRS be created. Also, another thing about Abraham Lincoln, apparently before he died, he signed all this paperwork creating the Secret Service. So you made the IRS, you made the United States of America, you expanded the railroads all the way into Utah and all that shit, Montana. At the same time, working with all of the French royalty, the French Emperor Napoleon, who was not royalty, he made himself royalty, which is hilarious because von der Leyen, who controls the United Nations or NATO today, it was von der Leyen's great-great-grandfather or great-great-great-grandfather or whatever. They're silk merchant lords. It was the von der Leyen family that knighted Napoleon. Fascinating.
Yet we have memoirs that were published in 1863 about the Knights of the Golden Circle, which postulate that they are one of the most important and powerful secret organizations who control much of the American South. Indeed, in 1861, we have front page articles about the Knights of the Golden Circle being published in the New York Times, describing the powerful secret organization as a successor to.
Okay, Tartaria. Tartaria was a loose conglomerate of clans that wasn't introduced into this European nation thing. So all Tartaria is like a name. It's like America. Like when someone says America, you picture all the states and you see all the borders in your head. Tartaria was literally the same thing. That was the name that the Crimean people used. Crimea, northeast of Crimea, Tartar still exists right there. It's one of the last extants left of this old Tartarian philosophy of what the Europeans called motherfuckers that they didn't know what to call them. That's all Tartaria is. It's nothing nothing like mud flood related, nothing about free energy. It's literally like nomadic tribes. It's like what Germany was before Germany. All these little bitty fucking areas. And then they started calling it Germany. They had bastard names for it then. It's the same principle. And now then it was called the USSR, and now it's called Russia. 'Tis all.
To the Order of the Lone Star, which itself had been organized to conquer Nicaragua, which it did under the command of one of its founding members, none other than William Walker. Essentially, the Order of the Golden Circle was secretive for much longer than the current narrative gives it credit for, and the reported history that we have today appears to only have occurred after incidents happened that brought the organization to national limelight. We're told the Knights of the Golden Circle implemented a policy of promoting Knights of the Columbian Star, their highest rank, to the highest levels of public office, including president. And this nearly occurred in the year 1860. We're told several members of the outgoing James Buchanan staff were the highest ranking members of the Knights of the Golden Circle, including the Secretary of War, John Floyd, and the Secretary of Treasury, Howell Cobb, as well as the Vice President himself, John Breckinridge. In 1860, the Knights of the Golden Circle orchestrated a plan where they secretly captured as many navy yards, forts, railroads, etc. as possible using their substantial means. The plan was to stop Abraham Lincoln, who had won the presidency, from being able to reach Washington, D.C. And we're told hundreds of knights were stationed in Baltimore, Maryland, with a plan of intercepting Lincoln on his way to his inauguration. The knights would then reveal themselves to have already captured the forts of Washington, D.C., before then installing John Breckinridge, Buchanan's vice president, and the Knights of the Golden Circle leader as the new president of the United States. As the Knights seized control of Baltimore and began seizing forts in the South, this plot was ousted by the federal government. It became front page news, leading to a massive distrust of the Democratic Party, who became known as the Copperheads, those who publicly sought peace, but behind closed doors sought to illegally manipulate the system. By 1859, these Knights of the Golden Circle had castles in every state. Although considered a Unionist, Sam Houston also was a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, and he was most likely a very high-ranking member. He went before the U.S. Congress in 1858 and claimed, and I quote, "The United States needs to declare and maintain an efficient and effective protectorate over the states of Mexico, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, and San Salvador," end quote. By 1860, the Texas division of the Knights of the Golden Circle had 21 castles alone, with over 4,000 military knights in its service. President Buchanan was strongly supported by the Knights as well, and may have also been a secret member. Originally, through the year 1861, the Knights of the Golden Circle initially only organized to extend America's territory in hopes of creating a grand slaveholding union that would control the entire New World. However, with the election of Abraham Lincoln, the Knights of the Golden Circle were said to have changed their position and drafted an order for secession from the northern United States. We're told by February 1861, former leader of the Texas Rangers and Knight of the Golden Circle commander, Bren McCullough, marched on San Antonio with a cavalry of 550 men from 6 Texas castles. These troops successfully captured the arsenals in San Antonio. The Knights of the Golden Circle were also responsible for the successful temporary takeover of the New Mexico territory in 1861, which was followed by the New Mexico Campaign, also led by the Knights of the Golden Circle, where the Knights attempted to conquer most of the south and west of the United States, including the gold fields in Colorado and then the major ports of California. By 1862, it was reported to Congress that former President Franklin Pierce was in fact a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, but this was never confirmed. However, the history gets even stranger. This order, the Knights of the Golden Circle, again described in the current narrative as small and without any major gains, was by 1863 in direct opposition of Congress, who had enacted a military draft for the Civil War. Many, even those in the Republican Party, were said to have denounced the draft, and further growth of the Knights of the Golden Circle is recorded at this time, having established hundreds of their castles throughout the United States. We're told by the Gettysburg Campaign in 1863, the Knights of the Golden Circle had also invaded or infiltrated South Central Pennsylvania. Thousands of $1 paper tickets from the Order or the Knights of the Golden Circle were presented to the thousands of Amish farmers in Pennsylvania. We're told the Knights of the Golden Circle then taught the Amish the secret hand signs to give when the Confederates arrived, as well as presenting them with the $1 tickets equivalent to roughly $25 today. These secret hand gestures and the tickets were supposed to have saved the Amish in Pennsylvania from destruction during the Civil War.
What you do today changes what you need tonight. Get personalized comfort from Sleep Number.
This little light of mine has been dark for quite some.
In California, the Knights of the Golden Circle.
What's cool is I have 2 Knights of the Golden Circle gold coins made by the people in the yellow on this map right here. These are 18, so small. $18.58 and $18.58. So both of these little bitty golden coins are made by these dudes.
Circle retrofitted ships and began raiding the Pacific coast for gold beginning in the 1860s. By 1863, and nearing the height of the Civil War, the Knights of the Golden Circle reorganized first as the Order of American Knights and then again as the Order of the Sons of Liberty in 1864. By the end of 1864, we're told thousands of members of the Knights of the Golden Circle held office throughout the country, and a plan was also being developed in the Old Northwest, being the region directly around the Great Lakes, to overthrow the North and end the war. However, this plot was also ousted by the federal government, and both the Knights of the Golden Circle and the Order of the Sons of Liberty were prosecuted nationwide, leading to the supposed dissolving of the entire secret society. However, adding further fuel to the secret endless theory regarding this order and the idea that they may have survived. In 2013, in Trinity County, California, there was discovered the Saddle Ridge Hoard, a well that they do not believe that any of these coins were from any thefts or other missing coins that were stolen over the last 200 years, meaning this massive collection of Civil War era gold coins was most likely acquired through relatively honest means. But again, that's still open for debate. However, one of the theories which has generated the most traction with historians and even in scientific circles is that this gold coin stash is from the Knights of the Golden Circle, as their collection of funds that they accumulated during the end of the Civil War. These funds would have been hidden from the federal government to be stashed away for the financing of a future second Civil War, which is written and foretold in the Knights of the Golden Circle literature. According to the deciphering of the narrative, we have a known list of confirmed members of the Knights of the Golden Circle, which include Bickley, the founder, John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln, Albert Pike of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the Grand Wizard, Nathan Bedford Forrest, the outlaw Jesse James, as mentioned earlier, Sam Houston, as well as the Confederate spies, Cynthia Charlotte Moon and Virginia Moon, and the Vice President of the United States, John Breckinridge. We also have a multitude of prominent representatives and congressmen of the mid-19th century, and we also have an elaborate theory that claims that the Paysor family may have been leaders or founders of the Golden Circle as well. For an organization that we're told never had a lot of power, at least in the current narrative, and we're told they were fueled more by ambition, it certainly seems the Knights of the Golden Circle were in fact the true heart of the South, and backed by the leading financiers and Freemasons of this time period. The plot of the Knights of the Golden Circle appears to be one of the single most underreported events of the Civil War era, which is fascinating given it goes hand in hand with the war itself.
All right, that was good. I like that. That was good. All right, now we look over in Europe, see what they've been doing.
On a quiet night in 1982, Italian banker Roberto Calvi is on the run. He has spent a lifetime working for Banco Ambrosiano, a bank whose biggest customer is the Vatican. But now he's a fugitive, desperately trying to escape the long arm of the law. An Italian smuggler arranged for him to be driven overnight to Austria, where he shuttled between several cities for a few days before boarding a private charter in Innsbruck for a flight to London. After arriving in London, he finally can catch his breath. He has no idea what fate awaits him.
Mr. Calvi, dismissed as head of Italy's second-largest private bank, had been missing for 9 days. The police said a stroller came across his body early Friday, hanging from the scaffolding of Blackfriars Bridge over the Thames River in the heart of London's financial district.
For centuries, the Catholic Church has been a monumental pillar of human history. From the echoing halls of the Vatican to the humblest of rural chapels, its influence has permeated every corner of the globe. But it is also a powerful financial institution with the world's largest real estate collections and vested interests in a vast number of corporations.
The Vatican owns more than 5,000 church and investment properties around the world, a central office at the Catholic Church revealed for the first time Saturday, according to several news outlets.
Well, I think every Catholic who reads a story like this ends up caring, because in the end they want to know where their money is going.
The Vatican's need to generate revenue, like any large institution, has occasionally led to decisions that some could perceive as morally ambiguous.
It is the height of the Renaissance, and Italy is the epicenter of this movement, with major contributions in painting, sculpture, literature, and architecture. Around this time, the Vatican is a powerful entity in Europe, exerting considerable political power, influencing rulers, and governing a substantial territory in central Italy known as the Papal States. To maintain its power, the Vatican needs an ever-growing source of income. It relies on a brilliant strategy to take Vatican finances to the next level: selling indulgences.
The church found the money it needed in the selling of so-called indulgences, a 6th century invention whereby the faithful paid for a piece of paper that promised that God would forgo any earthly punishment for the buyer's sins. The Vatican set prices according to the severity of the sin, and they were initially available only to those who made a pilgrimage to Rome.
This strategy has brought significant income to the Vatican, causing its assets to skyrocket. But what the church doesn't realize is that this strategy for generating extra income is quickly getting out of control.
The licentious lifestyle of the papal court and the widespread abuses in selling indulgences became a rallying cry for Martin Luther and the Reformation.
Ultimately, Martin Luther's Reformation transforms the religious world. But for the Catholic Church, it also represents a major financial setback. But approaching the end of the 18th century, the Vatican will suffer an even worse financial catastrophe. In 1789, a crisis is brewing in France. After decades of growing anger with the government, a revolution erupts, culminating in the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. Europe is thrown into chaos once again. But one man uses this chaos as a ladder: Napoleon Bonaparte, who rises to power in the aftermath of the revolution. He immediately sees the advantage of controlling the papacy. By 1798, French forces
been muted this whole time. I've been muted. Okay, I'll start over. So this book was written basically 15 years, a short decade after Napoleon was killed. And it's one of 3 volumes. It was written in the 1700s. It is the first print. In it, look at this drawing in here. Isn't that fascinating? Here's another Napoleon drawing. And basically, this is, I was saying right before I realized I was muted that you want to find books that were written before World War I and World War II, because you get a little bit better telling of the story. So you had the Louis family be relegated to the temple. and it's called the Temple. And the Temple is an old Knights Templar facility, and that's where they kept Boy Louis and his mother. It explains all that, explains everybody and their heads on pikes. Everybody's heads on pikes was a crazy, like France wasn't fucking around back then, especially the Parisii of France. The Parisii, it tells stories that you don't read on Wikipedia and other things like this. But before the 1850s, you had the Masonic temple called the Nine Sisters, the Les Nous Serreux or whatever, Le Logo de Nusu. Anyway, it's a Masonic lodge that basically like the Hanseatic League and all these motherfuckers used to make the river merchants, because Napoleon was basically a river merchant. It made the Hanseatic League, the Brits, Holland, and all of those areas started opening up all these Masonic temples everywhere. And this temple was opened by Benjamin Franklin and Voltaire. And so while this is going on, and then also you got to remember before Napoleon took over, because he was basically Rosicrucian, he went to Egypt and slept in the Great Pyramid of Giza. He slept in that bitch, and he left with all these really old jewels, and those jewels that he left with are in museums in France today. And so like pay attention to like this last few seconds and picture in your mind as Napoleon is rising to power. It is these Masonic temples and these synagogues that were supposed to be wiped out. And remember, Knights Templars are bankers. The Princess of Japan today is trained by Knights Templars, a Knights Templar college. Cool, huh? And all right, let's go back to this. Share this tab. So as Napoleon, and then it's fascinating shit.
He's the advantage of controlling the papacy. By 1798, French forces have invaded Rome itself, proclaiming a Roman republic and effectively ending papal rule over the city. Pope Pius VI dies on August 29th, 1799, in Valence, France, still in French captivity. The fall of the Vatican and the subsequent death of Pope Pius VI nearly bring the Roman Catholic Church to an end. In the 1830s, after the upheaval of the Napoleonic Wars and the Congress of Vienna in 1815, the Papal States are restored to papal control, but the Vatican is in a dire financial situation. Desperate for enough funding to remain operational, the Church reaches out to an unlikely financier, the Rothschilds. In the 1830s, the Rothschild banking dynasty established itself as a key player in international finance.
So, imagine the Godfather.
By stationing its
And so in the Godfather movies, instead of it being a bunch of Italians, they're Jews. And it's the Rothschilds that Al Pacino is playing.
Members across key European cities, Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples, the Rothschilds were extensively involved in government finance, issuing bonds and lending money to states, especially during times of distress when higher interest rates could be charged. And at the time, there is one powerful entity in Europe in such financial distress: In 1831, Gregory XVI became Pope. He knows the Vatican might not survive long unless there is an immediate cash infusion. For the first time in the Church's history, the Vatican decides to borrow money from the most prominent Jewish banker. James de Rothschild, head of the family's Paris-based headquarters, becomes the official papal banker. One of his brothers, Karl, who runs the family's Naples branch, begins traveling to Rome to consult with the Pope.
Their financial empire prompted a mixture of envy and resentment among church officials. Most traditionalists, who referred to James as the leader of international Jewry, were appalled that the church had resorted to Christ killers for financial succor. French poet Alfred de Vigny wrote that a Jew now reigns over the Pope and Christianity. He pays monarchs and buys nations.
The Rothschilds lend the Vatican 40 million euros in today's money. It becomes a lifeline that the church desperately needs. The unlikely alliance is forged, and with the Rothschilds' influence, the church begins a series of financial reforms, which mean more ways for the church to accumulate assets.
And so
historically, the Vatican collected money.
Another thing to remember, so like the first central bank for the European Union, that bank was made by the royal court Jew at the order of Emperor Francis, the Holy Roman Emperor Francis. And it's so weird. We just had a pope named Francis. And it was the central bank that he made by his royal court Jew, that established the central bank today that we now see as the European Central Bank for the original 7 or 9 states or whatever it was. The Rothschilds have essentially been they've only had the royal court Jew status for the Dutch family, that is the family that's the King Charles. His father or grandfather said, "Every drop of my blood is German." King George said that. Every drop of my blood is German. It was that Holland, Brussels, Hessian area, and they made the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas are the Windsors, German family. They have been the royal court Jew essentially for the British Empire for the last 250 to 260 something years. They're not even royalty. They're just when Charles sits down at his table of 12 and he's the 13th, you have the 2 Jews who sit directly next to him in the first 2 seats. And one of them used to be Jacob Rothschild, but he died. And now it's Baron Nat Rothschild, the Nat Rothschild who used to be dating Natalie Portman. So now he sits next to King Charles with that other powerful Jewish lady, forget her name. And then it's the other people, the other seats that are filled by interesting folks. Yada, yada, yada. So this is happening at the same time as the other things that I've been explaining. All this shit is happening in the exact same time. And what's hilarious, because you saw Vienna on that map next to Frankfurt, that's one of the T spots. Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, our presidents, the guy who used to run our FBI, the homosexual dude, forget his name. He's been in that tea shop. All these people have been to this specific tea shop. Gandhi, the fucking black dude from South Africa who went to prison. That motherfucker's been in that tea shop. And in Aachen, 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 Germany, you can draw a 33-mile line and circle a 33-mile circumference around Aachen, Germany. That's where motherfucking what's his face is buried. the king who consolidated France, Germany, and all that stuff. That fucking asshole. Charlemagne or whatever. All these problems. And that tea shop is literally a day's drive away from Charlemagne's fucking monastery thing with his grave. You encompass Hesse, the Brussels, the Dutch areas, the North Sea Empire, the Hanseatic League, all these crazy Starfort temples. It's where these motherfucking a bunch of priories, important priories, Benedictine monks and shit like that, all in this circumference. And you know what's interesting? Almost every railroad that's privately owned in America, the railroad company owns both sides of the railroad they own up to 33 miles that's the maximum that they own, is up to 33 miles of each side of the railroad.
Money through what is called Peter's Pence. It dates back to at least the 8th century and has its roots in England, where Anglo-Saxon kings collected annual tax for the land to support the Pope.
This donation, known traditionally as Romascot, was collected on the feast of Saints Peter and Paul and was sent to the Pope as a gesture of solidarity and support for the papacy.
But for the Catholic Church at the time, that income source alone is not sufficient, and they soon begin to sell bonds to the Catholic faithful. These bonds are essentially financial instruments that individuals can purchase, thereby loaning money to the Vatican with the promise of repayment, often with interest. This method allowed the Vatican to raise the necessary funds while engaging the faithful directly in supporting the papal mission. But the Vatican doesn't stop there. As the capital market system is being adopted across Europe, the Vatican Bank, with vast amounts of gold, needs to diversify into other assets and grow its wealth. And the Vatican begins investing in real estate across Rome, buying up properties and renting them out to generate income. But the Church also realizes the potential of stocks and begins investing heavily in the stocks of the Bank of Rome, hoping to grow the wealth of the Church. The investment in the Bank of Rome has been a profitable one. Within years of investing in the bank's stocks, it has created huge profits for the Church. As the Vatican emerges onto the financial market as a major player, many companies and even countries begin to view the Vatican as a partner to do business with. One of them is Germany.
All right, and don't forget, at this time, the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas and all those dudes, not only did they have the British throne, they had the throne of the Netherlands, the Dutch. They also had the Russian throne. They were all fucking related, all of them. They were fucking cousins. And some of them were inbred cousins. And you know what's also interesting about Benjamin Franklin coming over here to christen the Nine Sisters Masonic Temple? He also learned the postal service. So not only is he a Mason opening temples, he was a counterfeiter and a money printer and a pamphleteerist. He was the first maximalist for propaganda in America. Not the first propagandist, but the first, like. And then on the money that he made, it said, if you forge my money, you deserve to die. That don't tread on me shit. At the same time, he's making counterfeit money. He overprinted everything. At the same fucking time, he's learning in Europe by that fucking king in one of these goddamn tea shops of how to make the postal service work in America. And the postal service in all of Europe, it was, and these families still run the show today. The original family that ran all of the OG postal service in Europe used a giant circle, and each of the routes were a rainbow color in a circle. And depending on who you were in this power structure, you got that color. It was a rainbow colored instrument used to define the routes that you were allowed to run as a post general master. And the post general master was more powerful than generals in the motherfucking military. And then he comes to America, makes America, tells us your republic, if you can keep it, while he's counterfeiting money, banging everyone, dissecting people in his houses, creating the Postal Service, which was a giant, they used to ship people. You could ship children on these trains that they owned. Like, it's...
After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by a Serbian nationalist, Europe is once again thrown into war on a scale unprecedented in world history. As the war escalates, Pope Benedict XV, who assumed the papacy in 1914, finds himself navigating a treacherous path between the warring nations.
The war has caused a lot of financial strains on the church. Remember, the church's major income comes from donations from various countries. During wartime, people simply don't have the money or the time to donate.
But Germany sees the importance of having the Vatican as an ally. Germany also knows that it can't just give money to the Vatican outright.
Germany was covertly funneling cash to the church through Swiss banks and labeling it Peter's Pence. That helped stabilize the church's finances. The German Foreign Ministry...
You know what fraud? Pope Francis, who was named after the emperor who created the first central bank. Pope Francis got caught like basically stealing all of the money from Peter's Pence. And what's also hilarious is while he was stealing all of Peter Pence's, like, you could skim off the top and there would still be like some donations. Like Peter's Pence probably did some good, but once Pope Francis got around, no more. And he also took over SMOM. He took over the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. He fucking canned that one bald guy who was actually a decent knight, and he put some fucking schmuck in there. And then he also took over that Templar shit, and he made the Nabisco boy, Macron, president of France. So you go from working, because Nabisco was owned by the Rothschilds. So you go for working for a firm that handled all of Nabisco's shit to becoming president of France. And when you become president of France, you become the co-prince of Andorra. And the co-prince of Andorra only answers to the Pope. No one else. The co-bishop of Andorra, who also runs France as well, he only answers to the Pope. So Macron only answers to the Pope. No one else.
Separately sent the Vatican cash from a propaganda slush fund, and the Austrians joined with a clandestine subsidy to Benedict.
And it soon becomes clear that the Vatican is an ideal party for covert money operations. The Vatican realizes that it needs a professional to manage its growing financial empire. And soon, they find the perfect man for the job.
Track every stat, catch every highlight, and play along. The NBA gets even better on Peacock.
There's a car barreling towards me, but all I can think about is how stuck I feel.
Bernardino Nogara grew up in a middle-class farming family with Jewish lineage near Lake Como. But Nogara was a devout Catholic who graduated with honors in industrial and electrical engineering from Politecnico di Milano.
Do you know when King George he settled the Israel thing? He had, and that's why he stepped down so fast and gave his daughter, Queen Elizabeth, the crown. The Ottomans said, look, let us in your trade system. will stop fucking around so much. Iran doesn't know how to do this. And we will give you, because these fucking Zionists won't leave us alone, we will give you the land deed of Israel. So essentially the Ottomans, which is controlled by like 13 people, 13 families who control Turkey today, they gave the deed of Israel to Queen Elizabeth. The throne of Jerusalem didn't change. The King of Spain or the Queen of Spain, they hold the throne of Jerusalem. And the papacy made a deal with all this grand scheming. The person who, when they made Israel, the person who blessed and made all the rabbis for Israel was the motherfucking Pope. It was the Pope. The Pope made all the rabbis of the brand new reborn Israel. Jacob Rothschild and his father and his his uncle Eric de Rothschild, Baron Eric de Rothschild, and Baron Evelyn de Rothschild, or whoever the fuck it was, and Jacob Rothschild, because they own all the concrete and rebar companies, they own all the copper, they own all the things that make copper wire. They designed the Knesset, all the government buildings in Israel, the Supreme Court. All those designs that if you Google map, you look at the Supreme Court, that is made by Jacob Rothschild. It was his firm that got to do it because his family owns all the concrete and rebar companies.
Starting in the mining industry, Nogara quickly develops a reputation for his financial acumen, especially his ability to manage risk. His career propels him to become the Italian delegate to the Ottoman Public Debt Council and to participate in the Versailles Peace Conference after World War I. But for Nogara, a bigger opportunity awaits.
After a masterly speech by Premier Mussolini, the Senate this evening, by 315 votes to 6, approved the Lateran treaties affecting the pacification of the church and state in Italy.
And this is at this right here. Mussolini has already gone to that tea place in Vienna. So after they're like, Mussolini, sir, would you like to come to Germany? You can come hang out at this tea spot, or do you want to go to the one by the Greeks? You want to go to that? He went to that tea spot. And then after he went to that tea spot, this happened.
Amidst stirring scenes of enthusiasm.
In 1929, the country of Italy and the Vatican reached a landmark agreement known as the Lateran Pax. It creates Vatican City as its own country, allowing the Pope to rule it. As part of the agreement, the government of Italy pays the Holy See 750 million Italian lira in cash and 1 billion lira in government bonds. With this sudden increase in capital, the Vatican needs a man capable enough to manage it.
Nogara was very well connected, even though there were some whispers about the family's Jewish background. He seemed like a very faithful Catholic and had a really strong financial expertise. So Pope Pius chose him to handle the significant funds that came from the Lateran Pacts.
Okay, I want everyone to know when Tree Goblin, the European, you call him British if you want, when he types America funded Italian fascist party, facts, all of our institutions were, as I explained, owned by France, Paris, Rome, or London, or Brussels. So all of this, our entire Vanguard, all that stuff, the insurance companies, do you know who invented insurance companies? Well, by gosh, it was the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, the motherfucking royalty of the Brits, going all the way back to King James. The firefighters and the royalty needed to find out a way to stop squabbling over how to deal with burning shit down. And back in the day, one of the best examples of how this used to work was that something of New York, Gangs of New York. The Gangs of New York explicitly, clearly shows what these firefighters used to do. So the royalty was like, motherfucker. So they invented insurance companies with the Sun people, the Sun thing, that showed that you had paid your dues. So if your shit was on fire, the firefighters would put your shit out. And then the insurance thing really turned into something that they never thought it would turn into, which is what our insurance premiums going up is all because of Europe. It's all because of Europe. Using American institutions that are owned by Europeans. So America funded Italian fascists. No, we didn't. We didn't. It's not how this works.
Within just months after Nogara becomes the banker for the church, a global crisis erupts.
Premier Mussolini delivered in the Senate a frank and caustic speech on Italy's financial and economic situation, in which he blamed this country's ills on the Depression in America.
Initially, after the crash of 1929, there was a V-shaped recovery, and people thought it was just a temporary stock market glitch, but the real economic depression didn't really hit until 2 and 3 years later.
By 1932, the Great Depression has reached and spread all over Europe. The Vatican sees its assets lose 30% of their value, and its debt payments mount. To tackle the financial difficulty, Pope Pius XI gives Nogara full authority to do whatever is necessary to help save the Vatican's finances. For Nogara, it is the biggest challenge he has ever faced. He knows that if he lets the Vatican go bankrupt, all the blame will fall on him, and he may go down as one of the most hated people in history.
Get fast, powerful relief of your worst symptoms, like nasal congestion. Claritin clears.
OMG, y'all. Travelers swear by this one trick. What's up with...
Tree Goblin, I know you were here for this discussion. We already went over without emotions how the rainbow works. And I even alluded the rainbow system to the Postal Service. So yeah.
To boost finances, he asked the Pope to declare 1933 a holy year to boost donations from believers. Nogara also begins to hedge against any potential financial downfall by loading up on gold.
The way we like to describe gold is it's a hedge against debasement. Let's go back to the word debasement. Where does it come from? It means adding base metals into precious metals. You're debasing the gold. So if you own pure gold, it's a really good hedge against debasement.
He also begins to buy up real estate at low prices in France, Britain, and Switzerland. At the same time, he notices price discrepancies with various government bonds. He sees an opportunity for arbitrage. To ensure his actions don't draw unnecessary attention to the church, he establishes a network of holding companies to manage these investments discreetly, ensuring confidentiality and minimizing political and financial exposure. Thanks to his trading strategy and financial acumen, the church avoids another financial collapse by 1936. His strategic investments position the church for an unprecedented recovery, especially with its real estate holdings soaring in value. Bernardino Nogara is now one of the most important and powerful men in the Vatican. The Vatican may have bounced back from the Great Depression, but little does it know.
Germans were broke. There was no Germany. There was no such thing as Germany. The Germans weren't broke. Not even close. They Let me look at Czechoslovakia real quick. 62. Okay, here we go. An authorized plunder. We're going to read from the Tower of Basel. When Nazi Germany annexed the Czechoslovak border province of the Sudetenland in September 1938, it immediately absorbed a good part of the country's banking system, as well as most of Czechoslovakia's strategic defenses. By then, the country's national bank had prudently transferred most of its gold abroad to two accounts in the Bank of England, one in the name of the BIS, and the other one in the National Bank of Czechoslovakia itself. Countries had deposited some of their gold reserves in sub-accounts at the BIS account in London to ease gold sales and purchases. Of the 94,772 kilograms of gold, only 6,337 remained in Prague. The security of the national gold was more than the monetary issue. The Czechoslovak reserves, like those of the Republic of Spain, were an expression of nationhood, carved out of the remains of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918. The Czechoslovak Republic was a new and fragile nation. A good part of the gold had been donated by the public to the country in the early years. Joseph Malik, the governor of the National Bank, and his fellow Czechs believed that even if the Nazis dismembered their homeland, if the national gold was safe, then something of the country's independence would endure. They were wrong. The Czechoslovaks' faith in the probity of the BIS and the Bank of England was tragically misplaced. The gold was sacrificed with barely a second thought to the needs of the transnational finance and the Third Reich. The Nazis' first demand came in February 1939, with Berlin ordered Prague to transfer just over 14.5 metric tons of gold, supposedly to back the German currencies now circulating in Sudetenland. This was certainly an innovative idea. First, invade a neighboring country, annex part of it, and then demand the newly truncated state supply the gold to pay for the loss of its territory. The following month, the question had become academic. On March 15th, the Wehrmacht marched into Prague. The German protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was declared, and the Czechoslovakia no longer existed. But the gold reserves did. 3 days later, the Reich Bank official was dispatched to the National Bank of Czechoslovakia and ordered the dictators under the threat of death to issue two orders. Thanks to the diligent detective work of Piet Clements, the BIS historian, we have a clear picture of what happened next. The first order instructed the BIS to transfer 23.1 metric tons of Czechoslovakian gold held at the BIS account at the Bank of England to the Reich Bank to the BIS account, and they also held at the Bank of England. The second order instructed the Bank of England to transfer almost 27 metric tons of gold held in the National Bank of Czechoslovakia, their own account, to the BIS gold account at the Bank of England. Malik and his fellow directors hoped that it would be obvious that the instructions had been issued under duress and so would not be implemented. The Nazis had just invaded Czechoslovakia and would obviously target the national gold reserves. But Malik had not reckoned on Montague Norman. The governor of the Bank of England had no interest in whether the Czechoslovakia Bank was free or a Nazi colony. Political considerations must not affect the BIS's transaction. The transfer order, he said, must go through. Meanwhile, in Basel, Joachim Bayon, a Dutch president of the BIS, wavered. Bayon dissented the matter with the BIS legal advisor, Felix Weiser. But like Norman, Weiser took the most formalistic approach possible. As long as the paperwork was in order, the monies must go through. So Germany had these borders that were made after World War II that didn't exist during this. The money problem was absolutely fine. All you needed was a fax. And also, they plundered the fuck out of everyone. And really, it was just a couple families. And coincidentally, it was Trump's family in that Hessian region who was fucked by these people. And his family, part of it moved to Scotland, and the other part moved to America. And then after Trump's family was butt fucked by these people, somehow he's president today, and he keeps blowing up their shit. He keeps blowing up their shit. Why is Trump blowing up all of these people's shit? You know what's funny is Melania is from this area. What a coincidence. What are the odds? What are the motherfucking odds?
That another global crisis is about to erupt. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, showing the world just how powerful the country has become.
What Hitler's army introduced was the onset of mechanized warfare. So this is tanks supported by infantry, artillery supporting them. And then on top of that, you had tactical air support. They're all coordinated, synchronized, harmonized, and moving very, very rapidly.
Back in Italy, Mussolini's government is preparing to make a move as well. Nogara sees a great risk with the potential global conflict. He realizes the urgency to safeguard the Vatican's assets. The way to do this is by moving assets to neutral countries at the time, namely Switzerland and the United States. But America won't remain neutral for long.
Yesterday, December 7, 1940.
Y'all don't know something else is really interesting? Germany has been asking for their gold back from us since like the Die Hard 3 movie. And we have been slow rolling the fuck out of Germany in this gold. Why will we not give this gold back to Germany? One, it's not theirs. So it's ours now. It's ours. You stole it, we stole it from you. Like this. That's how it works.
41, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
And who was in control of the Empire of Japan's military when we were attacked in Pearl Harbor? Could you guess? Make a wild guess and say it couldn't be the German military, could it? Was it the German military? Because remember, at this time, German military had wholly control over Japan's military. Full control, because they were the central bankers. At this time, we were shoving the central bank inside of Japan. We're shoving that shit right up their ass. We had all the Templars there. We had all the Jesuits. We had all the Jews. We were all there to set that shit up. And just like in Vietnam, Truman, or whatever that asshole was who dropped that fake nuke, was just probably a big bomb, because isn't there radiation fallout? Regardless, those two areas that we obliterated, those were the key central areas where all of Japan held all of their land deeds for the property around the areas. They had an old school way of how all of the property worked in Japan. And magically, after we blow the fuck out of them with these cool bombs, and Germany has control over their military, and the emperor family is being subsumed, like we're giving them all these cool little fucking garter things that the Japanese have no business wearing. You see how it's all working? And then the emperor of Japan today, his sister and his wife or whatever are Templar trained. They went to Templar colleges. So in the fucking one of the husbands of one of the family members, his family owns all of the ports in southern Japan. And he's married into the family of the Emperor of Japan. He's a Jesuit. And they run Jesuit colleges in Japan. We put a central bank in there. We changed everything. We We gave them European rules for how contracts were signed up. We changed all the fuck out of Japan. We fucked that whole country up. And we're doing it to Iran right now.
After the Pearl Harbor attack, America is drawn into the war. The U.S. also begins economic sanctions on Axis powers, including Japan, Germany, and Italy, with asset freezes and import controls.
This is when Nogara's talent really shined. His goal was solely focused on maximizing and safeguarding the church's wealth. And because of his strategic investments in America, he was able to secure exemptions from the U.S. economic sanctions.
Don't just buy crypto. Trade the price action with futures. Regulated futures from CME Group.
And he doesn't stop there. To better navigate the financial environment during World War II, Nogara realizes that the Vatican should have its own bank, one that has the ability to operate in complete secrecy and without any transparency. On June 27, 1942, the Vatican establishes the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, also known as the Vatican Bank.
The IOR operated without the need to disclose its financial statements or activities publicly, did not pay taxes, and was not required to show profits. It also had the unique ability to destroy its files every decade.
It's a perfect vehicle to hide and launder money. By 1945, Nazi officials realize that they are losing. They turn to the Vatican Bank to help move their money.
It is estimated that the Nazis stole $598 million, this is 1945 dollars, worth of gold.
Around 200 million Swiss francs worth of gold are allegedly funneled through the Vatican Bank and possibly transferred onwards to South America. And it doesn't stop there. The Vatican also begins helping Nazi fugitives escape to South America as well.
U.S. intelligence had concluded that Archbishop Antonio Caggiano, a close Peron ally, was a conduit between the Italian escape networks and the South American Church, and that the Vatican as an institution, not merely as a group of scattered rogue clerics, was helping high-ranking Nazis escape justice.
Yeah, and they all landed where Mr. Yanafui lives. They landed in Argentina, Venezuela. So as I was going over earlier, we were supposed to take all that shit. But the French and the British and the Hanseatic, the remnants of the Hanseatic League, which is now British royalty, the Seine River merchants, the Rhine River merchants, all those guys who are now royalty, they stopped it all by using Abraham Lincoln. And now we're seeing a reboot of this problem again. And this happens every time there's a negotiation for these 99-year deals. And as Putin had clarified, he's like, I honor these contracts. But in Ukraine, all those deals from like the 1914s, 15s, 16s, and 17s that were initiated in the steppe, aka the Ukraine, all that shit expired in 2015, 16, and 17. And that's why you had the Europeans using like Victoria Nuland and all that, because the 99-year deal was over that they had established pre-World War I and World War I. Oh shit. Am I back? Am I back? I'm back, right? Yeah, I'm back. As they were dismantling all that, and they were going to keep the borders. And Putin's like, yo, this shit's done with. It's over with. And so he's going to get all the areas, the Kherson regions, the Crimea, and all in between, because that's where the salt is. That's where the gold is. That's where the resources are. And he wants that shit back. And he'll let the Dnieper people keep Kyiv and all that. but they're not keeping the east of Ukraine. Putin, Trump's not getting involved with all that. It'll all be settled through negotiations and contract signing. And that's exactly what's going on in Iran right now. They would not capitulate, and you played around too much, and now look what's happening. And that's just the way that it is. So I can't be mad at Trump. I can't be mad at Jews. I can't be mad at Zionists. Because like once you see what they do all the time, they play in a whole different world than we play in. Pure gangsters, pure mafia. You know? What do you want? They will fuck you up.
In the aftermath left by World War II, the continent lies in ruins. From the smoldering ashes of once great cities to the shattered lives of millions, Europe now needs rebuilding. To take full advantage of Europe's resurgence, Noguera realizes there are two industries in which the Vatican must invest heavily: the construction industry and the banking industry.
Confident that any recovery would include the financial sector, Noguera's team went on a buying binge of Italian banks. By 1950, the IOR owned a share or had a majority interest in 79 of the country's banks.
Real estate has been, and perhaps always will be, a profitable business for the church. In 1956, the church made millions just by selling lands to Italy to prepare for the Summer Olympics. As the Vatican Bank widens its financial empire across different countries, it needs someone with legal expertise to streamline transactions and investments. And in the late 1950s, an up-and-coming financial hustler is looking for an opportunity to make a name for himself. His name is Michel Sindona.
Yeah, the JP Morgan gave for yeah. Remember at the beginning of the stream, Tree Goblin, which I think you were here, I went over this whole golden circle thing. The Morgans were involved with the entirety of the Morgan thing as they were butt fucking the South with the shit that they were doing up in New Haven, Connecticut, Maryland, and all those little fucking shorey areas. The Morgans like to hang out, and a lot of them kind of moved in. Some of them became presidents, right? Or one of them, or one of the ones who was married into the Morgans became one of the Morgans became president somehow by proxy of the woman. And we also went over the biggest political divide in the 1800s. I specifically made sure I went over the 1800s. It's pivotal. From these Golden Cross people who were tied to Marco Rubio. These motherfuckers are tied to the people who invented railroads, expansion, made the IRS. What else they do? It really wasn't religiosity. It was religious people getting a hold of all these instruments. Because remember, another thing to point out is these military colleges. The military colleges basically run the world and everything, from Coca-Cola. You know, it's funny. They're part of like the Sig Gamma Alpha people, or whatever the fuck they're called. All the Coca-Cola people. One thing that Putin made sure he did when he was fucking up the east coast of Ukraine was destroy all the Coca-Cola shit. Which is beautiful. Yeah, merchant princes. Napoleon was a river merchant, motherfucker. And like I was saying about the Hanseatic League, North Sea Empire, Saxe-Coburg, like it's a whole shebang going back since like the 700s with Canute. Canute married into the fucking duchies. If I'm not mistaken, Canute was a duchy himself. His father, the Charlemagne, the Merovingians, it's literally these people right now. The two biggest money traders in London today, is the heir of Napoleon's family and the heir of the Lafayette family. And it was Napoleon and the Lafayette who started all of this. And they were both merchants. The families were merchants. And that river goes straight through the Paris areas. The English Channel. All the assholes who have controlled the English Channel is causing all of our problems today.
Michel Sindona grows up in a poverty-stricken family in 1920. But even as a young man, Sindona shows an above-average ability with numbers. Michel Sindona's aptitude for math wins him a full scholarship to the University of Messina. But after graduation, he feels stuck at a dead-end job. He knows that to become rich, he must be willing to take risks that others don't have the guts to take. Soon, he finds his groove, helping wealthy people and organizations evade taxes, including the mafia.
At the beginning of the 1950s, he traveled to New York and met with the Gambino family. In 1957, he had become closely associated with them and was chosen to manage their profits from heroin sales.
His ability to help people avoid taxes means he can maximize profit for his clients. It is a skill highly desired by the Vatican. In early 1959, the future Pope of the Catholic Church, Montini, John XXIII, wants to build a retirement home called Casa Madonnina. But he wants to raise money secretly and quickly. So he turns to Sindona for help.
Sindona was able to raise $2 million needed for the project in a single day. This kind of speed of moving money around will come really handy for the church in the future.
In the end, working with Sindona will be one of the worst mistakes the church has ever made. But in the meantime, the church is poised to make more tax-free money than at any other time in its history.
King Charles, his brother, is the Grand Master of the Masons. The king is also a Mason.
As the Vatican's finance becomes more global, the Church promotes Cardinal Paul Marcinkus as the president of the Vatican Bank. Marcinkus grew up in a working-class American family. He was educated at Quigley Preparatory Seminary and later at the University of St. Mary of the Lake.
Again, Tree Goblin knows nothing. The Clinton family, who started education in America, are extants. That Clinton family goes back to the Rothschilds to the motherfucking 1600s. Just like the Kennedys, the Kennedy family is always used. The Kennedy family has been used in Britain. They've been used here in America. They're pawns on a chessboard. Bill Gates, his father and they started DARPA. And that's all DynCorp, Lockheed Martin, and all that shit. And DynCorp is British. Lockheed Martin and all that stuff are owned by Vanguard and BlackRock, which is owned by these French, and owned by the British, and is owned by the Italians, and is owned by the fucking Brussels people. It's America. You are allowed to rob and steal. You're allowed to steal elections. You're allowed to put fake judges. You can make them magistrates, and magistrates can have positions of real judges. America, you can do anything. It's totally legal. And the military handbook explicitly explains if our elections are subverted or stolen or anything, daily activity must go on. The courts must not close. The JAG courts must not close. And business must go on as usual. That's literally in the military handbook. And you are allowed to use the military to steal elections. Gina Haspel was in the IG Farben building, which is supposedly where all the Germans used to make all the gas. You know what IG Farben is? It's called Bayer today, the headache medicine. The CIA headquarters building is in an old IG Farben thing, and they were trying to hack the elections from an IG Farben building and Romania and whatever that other European fucking dumbass country is. Like, I don't know, Yugoslavia or something. I forget. I have to look at a Google map. Serbia. And we're king of the inbred. Yeah, I don't think. William married a Jacobite, a future consort queen to whatever the hell Prince Williams calls himself when he becomes king. Hopefully it's not Charles. She's a Jacobite. That's not inbreeding.
In Mundelein, Illinois, where he was ordained a priest in 1947.
The 6'3" American-born Marcinkus seemed more like a football lineman than a low-ranking clerical bureaucrat assigned to the Secretary of State's office. When he drank whiskey, he did not hide the bottle. When a senior cleric walked into the room, he smoked cigars and did not ask permission before lighting one.
As an American working for the Vatican, Marcinkus was a very great diplomat. He was adept at handling all the international assignments given by the church, and he managed to become a part of the inner circle of the Pope.
For Marcinkus, his predecessor Nogara's achievements loom large. He knows that although he doesn't have that financial genius, he is determined to accomplish great things for the Vatican by working with smart financiers, people like Sindona and Roberto Calvi. Roberto Calvi grew up in a banking family. His father was a prominent banker. At a young age, his father showed him there was only one business worth getting into: the business of money.
From the very beginning, he learned that by networking and moving money around, it was possible to build a fortune without having to create or build anything himself.
In 1960, while working at Banco Ambrosiano, a bank catered to Catholic clients, Calvi has the major breakthrough when Sindona introduces him to Marcinkus. As the new president of the Vatican Bank, Paul Marcinkus is criticized for his lack of financial training. Marcinkus believes that in order to make up for that shortcoming, he needs to do something big. And Calvi could be just the guy to make it happen for him. Unlike his predecessor Nogara, he lacked the ability to master the complexities of international finance.
Some speculate that Marcinkus, being financially illiterate, was easily taken advantage of by Calvi and Sindona. Mastering complexity is an essential skill for all finance practitioners. It entails an understanding of probability, data visualization, and game theory.
A fantastic place to effectively learn these critical subjects is Brilliant.org. It is a platform where learning is active, featuring thousands of interactive lessons in math. There is but one exception. Within just a few short years, Calvi and Sindona have grown their own financial empires, bigger and faster than almost anyone. With the protection and backing of the Vatican Bank, no one can touch them. There is but one exception. After taking over Franklin National Bank, Sindona begins to engage in risky foreign exchange trades using the bank. Soon enough, the bank incurs tens of millions in losses.
The outflow of deposits from the Franklin National Bank increased somewhat during the week ended Wednesday. As a result, the bank has now lost nearly 24% of its deposits since its troubles first came to light on May 10th.
4,000 miles away from the U.S., Sindona's investment in Italian banks also begins to fail.
This must have been a really chaotic period for Sindona. He tried to use his legal expertise by merging various banks.
Anyway, he ends up getting murdered. Fascinating stuff. Gets more in depth than that. But we'll move on from that, and you can just, that was going into the 40s. You can kind of picture past that. So now let's do this. So we've been painting a picture from the late 1700s to today. And we're hitting a bunch of different areas that are happening precisely at the same time.
According to Poppy Bush himself, he named his oil company Zapata Petroleum after his favorite film, the 1952 picture Viva Zapata, starring Marlon Brando. The film tells the story of Mexican revolutionary hero Emiliano Zapata in his guerrilla struggle against the Mexican government during the Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century. The naming Zapata Petroleum is of course ironic, given Bush's continued siding with reactionary elements across Latin America, in contrast to the real Zapata's revolutionary legacy. Also, I highly doubt that Viva Zapata was actually Poppy Bush's favorite film, as it had just come out the year before he created the company, unless it really left an impression on him. Either way, the original financing for Zapata Petroleum came largely from his silent partners, most prominently Bush's maternal uncle Herbert Walker Jr. and his friend Eugen Meyer, the owner of the Washington Post. Poppy was supported by his wealthy business partners as well.
And we heard in the other videos, Knights of the Golden Cross and all that, made the Washington Post, and whatever the other one was. And you also need to keep in mind that at the same time, you had the Schiff family, and they made the New York Post. The Schiff family is the personal bookkeepers for the Rothschild family. And they also created Boy Scouts of America, which is basically controlled by Exxon now, and remnants of these people. So you got Rothschilds, Frenchies, Napoleon's family, the Trumans, the Morgan. They have been here for damn near 250 years. And just sometimes their last name changes because the woman ends up marrying the man, or they just change their name completely. But while the Vatican is doing all the stuff that they're doing, they're making all their banks, the CIA, the Operations of Strategic Services, which became the CIA, is an army wing, falls back into the military colleges that we're talking about, who did the expansions with like Abraham Lincoln and all that, making the United States, creating the Iron, blah, 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 blah. It's all connected. Post office, all it. They fucking.
Hugh and Bill Littke, wildcatters from Tulsa, Oklahoma that Bush had met while in Midland, Texas. The Litkes were already prominent oil men in their own regards, who would bring their expertise to Zapata Petroleum. According to Russ Baker, the Litkes led Zapata to drilling 127 consecutive quote-unquote wet holes, leading to a massive increase in Zapata's stock price in the early years. Zapata Petroleum, largely thanks to the Litkes' legitimate oil industry experience, was quickly booming.
Bro, look at it. Did you see that?
Alongside these seemingly legitimate and respectable investors was a previously mentioned mystery man named Thomas Devine, or Devine, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I'll say Devine. An MIT graduate who, according to his official New York Times obituary from 2019, had been a CIA staff officer since his graduation in 1949. Devine's association with Bush's Zapata almost guarantees that the company worked as some sort of agency front. Devine, much like Bush, differed from the other Zapata Petroleum partners, as he came from the same upscale Yankee world as Poppy, and not the cowboy world of the Southwest. Born in Rochester, New York, Devine would eventually be inducted into the Council on Foreign Relations much later in life, the Rockefeller-dominated Yankee think tank that counted as members the highest.
And you remember, the Council on Foreign Relations is in the Pratt House. And Pratt House is with the Clintons and the Rothschilds and all, and they are, like I said, they're the ones who made education on Clinton Street and da-da-da-da. And the Council of Foreign Relations, that building is owned by Mitt Romney. And if you know anything about Mitt Romney, that's the Mormon Mafia. They own hotel chains, which are tied to the Schiffs, with like Standard Hotels, the Hyatts, all that stuff. And of course, what do hotels use? A lot of concrete and rebar and copper wire. And who is that owned by? Who owns all those companies? Who owns all the insurance companies? Who's insuring this military operation?
Echelons of Northeastern power. Devine was
the continuance of this golden order, the original idea of the South taking over the Caribbean. And it's still going on today. They're using Trump, they're using Rubio. And while we're at it, we might as well go for Greenland. You know?
Was, much like Poppy Bush, an emissary from the white shoe WASP circles of the old establishment to Texas. It is unsurprising then that the CIA's Thomas Devine and the CIA's George Bush apparently got along quite well. In a November 29, 1975 memo for the Deputy Director of Operations at CIA, on screen now, Thomas J. Devine is described as a former CIA staff employee who later became a, quote, oil wildcatting associate with Mr. Bush, end quote, specifically stating that they co-founded Zapata Oil together. The memo states that Devine's effort fell under a terminated project codenamed W.U. Bryony, or LP Dictum. Now, disregarding the cryptonym for a second, it does appear, though, that Thomas Devine and Poppy Bush's working relationship extended far beyond their time in the oil industry in the 1950s. According to a 1968 CIA memo, on screen now, sent to the Department of Security, Devine is described as being a, quote, personal friend and unofficial foreign affairs advisor to Representative George Bush of Texas. Bush, at the time, serving his first term as a junior congressman from Texas. The memo describes Devine as having a role once again in this Project W.U. Bryony, as a commercial asset for the agency, role first term as a junior congressman from Texas.
All right, and so Bush on his way to Vietnam circa, it was Bush, it was the Careys, remember Heinz family, pickle factory people, the CIA folks. Because remember, the first place the CIA had its headquarters was in a pickle factory. That motherfucker who ended up getting executed in Arizona, John McCain, and Kerry and all them, all the operations that they were doing in Vietnam, just like they did in Japan. They were destroying all the old facilities, and they even named their operations after Napoleon's operations. Same thing Napoleon was doing, destroying all those places that house all the records of who owned what. And if they didn't do that, they just killed entire generations. So they got you from the paperwork, and they got you from your family just making you non-existent, and they take it anyway. They were doing the same thing. They did the same thing in Vietnam. They even named the operations after what Napoleon was doing. Like the whole Waterloo thing, that whole Waterloo thing was like this Jesuit battle that took place in like this fucking, hell yeah, Dr. Pepper. It took place like, you got to watch that Waterloo thing, that OG Waterloo thing. They even joke in that movie about Napoleon drinking blood because that motherfucker drank blood. And slept in the Tower of Giza for some reason because he's a freak. No, God damn it, Tree Goblin. Listen, the FBI was made by Napoleon's family. His family made it.
The memo describes Devine as having a role once again in this Project W.U. Bryony as a commercial asset for the agency insofar as, quote, and this is important, being a cleared and witting contact in the investment banking firm which houses and manages the proprietary corporation of W.U. Saline, end quote. So here we are left with two cryptonyms. First, Project W.U. Bryony, which many have interpreted as being Devine's codename, or at least the project that he was working for, and the subject W.U. Saline, which researchers have theorized as being George Bush's CIA cryptonym.
Tortoise wins! An upset for the ages.
So I would ask the board, what...
Note as well that...
That's Peter Strzok's family. You remember Peter Strzok from the government? He was the Duke Panda, like the Duke people who were trained to be CIA agents to infiltrate the FBI, like Seth Rich and all that crazy shit. The fuck was I about to say? Oh, they Peter Strzok's family and the ones who made, they own Easy Go golf carts. The people who made these fucking helicopters that we used in Vietnam, like they own like this giant thing. They were the ones who used to move nukes around. It's that family, the Strzok, whatever you want to call them. And they did their operations with those people. And that same family is the family who moved in all the weapons on the AC-130s and all that shit during the Iraq War. Same family who owns Easy Go golf carts.
That both of these cryptonyms are referring to salt in a certain sense. So W.U. Bryony, the brining process, which is some sort of salination process, and then W.U. Saline, as in a saline solution, water with salt. So there is clearly a link between these two cryptonyms, and both likely fell under the same program. Now, from my interpretation, and what I'm going to be arguing throughout this last chapter, is that it appears that Thomas Devine was coordinating CIA corporate cover operations in the Caribbean. Operations that used the likes of Poppy Bush and George de Mohrenschildt as Langley cutouts to support their operations in the Gulf of Mexico. The cryptonyms W.U. Bryony and L.P. Dictum, as noted in the first memo, appeared to be agency codenames for this project or elements of the project. These types of intel business cutout operations in many ways remind me of a much later CIA project known as In-Q-Tel. Founded in 1999, In-Q-Tel is the CIA's proprietary venture capital firm that provides seed capital to mostly tech startups in return for lucrative agency contracts and in-house software development for the intelligence community. In-Q-Tel is most famous for having provided part of the seed funding for Peter Thiel's Palantir, a now massive Silicon Valley case management and big data dragnet software firm that provides their software services directly to the US intelligence community and the Pentagon under the auspices of counterterrorism. In a sense, Thomas Devine, or as he may have been known, W.U. Bryony, were undertaking the same operations as their successors in In-Q-Tel, albeit at a much smaller scale and at a lower tech level. The wording in the 1968 memo, specifically alluding to Devine's role as a, quote, witting contact in the investment banking firm which houses and manages the proprietary corporation W.U. Saline, end quote, does seem to indicate that Devine's W.U. Bryony was working to pump seed capital into CIA shell companies and was likely the CIA case officer in charge of Bush and his intelligence business activities. Further indications of Devine's role as a CIA venture capitalist was his close ties to another agency business asset, the Russian-German George de Mohrenschildt, whom, according to Russ Baker, met together in secret in New York City in April 1963 to discuss de Mohrenschildt's ongoing operations in Haiti, a country that he had cultivated deep ties to. So really, there's only one conclusion that can be drawn from these groundbreaking memos. Thomas Devine was likely the CIA case officer assigned to Zapata Oil, and Bush's oil firm was likely an intelligence front in the Caribbean. The two men would subsequently remain close until the late 1960s, even allegedly traveling together to Vietnam in late 1967 and into early 1968 during Bush's first term in Congress. This trip to Saigon almost certainly had to do with increasing CIA activities in the Vietnam War, especially as their visit coincided with the ramping up of the horrifying CIA counterinsurgency operation known as the Phoenix Program, undertaken jointly by the CIA and the Pentagon under the Court's directive. Coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, taking over the operation of the Phoenix Program in late 1968 was CIA mastermind bureaucrat Ted Shackley. Visiting Congressman Bush and his CIA quote-unquote foreign policy advisor Thomas Devine would have likely met Shackley half a decade earlier, first in Florida, while he was acting as station chief at JM Wave Station in Miami from 1962 to 64, while the two men were themselves expanding their firm Zapata Petroleum. Much more on this in my upcoming videos about JM Wave. But these ongoing run-ins with top agency officials provides additional evidence that Bush was a longtime CIA asset, and mystery Zapata man Thomas Devine provides the key to understanding Bush's early relationship with CIA, not as an official spook per se, but instead as a roving emissary, representing Zapata oil on the outside, but really working for Langley undercover. Even though Zapata Petroleum was almost certainly a CIA front company, it nonetheless made massive profits in the 1950s Texas oil industry. If one had land in the lucrative Permian or East Texas basins, it was hard not to bring in massive profits in this environment.
And you know what's funny is still to this day, the Bush family owns huge. There's like 6 families or 7 families in Texas who own an ungodly amount of property in Texas, and the Bush family is one of them. And they took it over from, I don't fucking know, some other family that they ended up, the Prescott Bush people and all that ended up being assholes. They're Germans, you know. They come in, they move you out, and if you want to get anything done in Texas, you need the approval of the 6 gods of Texas, or whatever the fuck you want to call them. And you also want to know what's crazy. What was it? What bank did the Bushes start? So Prescott Bush, while all this is going on, he's still alive. But Prescott is clearly working in the CIA. He's part of the whole Project Paperclip stuff. He starts a Union Banking Corporation. Yeah, 7 people. Yeah, and he was one of 7 directors. I think it's the same thing in Florida. Like there's 7 of these landowners. And also George Bush, he was that was okay. So Prescott was the Brown, Harriman and Company, right? And the Browns and the Harrimans are with the Gettys and all those motherfuckers. What up?
I need the pink box.
Let's see, there's down there somewhere. Find it. Yeah, and ended up making like the second bank of fucking New York or some. What bank did George Bush run? Yeah, okay. George Herbert Walker Bush was the chairman of the committee of the First International Bank of Houston. And his grandfather started the Union Bank with the Brown Harrimans and all the Gettys and the Newsoms and the Pelosi's and all that who run the cave systems in California, while they were expanding their oil operation. And you remember, because the Bushes are Germans and all that, and they're using Vatican money, they're using French money they're using British money, and they're using Swiss money. And all of that money that they're using for this expansion is stolen shit, stolen gold, and all that from World War I and World War II, from simple facts like I had explained from the Tower of Basel. Pretty cool, huh?
And Zapata Petroleum did own such land, firstly on the Permian in West Texas. Not to mention Bush's main business partners, the Littke brothers, were themselves legitimate oil men and brought with them a wealth of contacts, resources, and maybe most importantly, a genuine desire to make money to the firm. Unsurprisingly, therefore, Zapata was profitable in its first years out of the gate. With such incredible success, one would think that Bush, the ostensibly independent businessman, would have been content with his newfound personal wealth and steady success as an independent oil tycoon, with lucrative oil drilling land.
There are hardworking people doing everything in their power to power everything you do.
A lot of dry rubs out there, but they're nothing like the dry rubs in here. Get Zaxby's famous fingers and wings in savory garlic parm, spicy Nashville hot, and zesty lemon pepper. You see that? Now Zaxby's is just rubbing it in. Who's got the sauce?
Zaxby's.
Yet, in maybe the most eyebrow-raising move of his early career in 1954, only a year after starting his first oil company to massive success, Bush inexplicably decided to start an offshoot firm to Zapata Petroleum that specialized in the far more technical and risky enterprise of offshore oil drilling, called Zapata Offshore. I should note here, just as to not cause any confusion, that so far in this video I've been using the Zapata Offshore logo, that being Bush's offshoot firm, interchangeably with the Zapata Petroleum Company that he founded with the Litkes. The reason for that is that there isn't really a logo for the Zapata Petroleum Company, so I decided to just use the offshore logo as a fill-in. So sorry if that caused any confusion, just thought I'd clear that up. But the logo that I've been using has been for Bush's offshoot firm that he founded a year after the original firm. Just thought I'd clear that up. Bush relocated from Midland, Texas to Houston, his base of operations for the remainder of the 1950s and largely throughout his career, and teamed up with fellow oilman Bill Clements Jr., the president of Sedco Oil Company, a massive international oil firm in its own regard, to develop the new spin-off venture, Zapata Offshore. Bill Clements Jr., for his part, would emerge from this point on as a prominent political backer of both George H.W. Bush and the Republican Party more broadly, starting with Richard Nixon in 1968. Clements was eventually rewarded massively for his continuous support of GOP causes, serving as Deputy Secretary of Defense under both Nixon and Ford from 1973 to 77, and then later being elected as Governor of Texas for 2 non-consecutive terms from 1979 to 83 and from 87 to 91. He was the first Republican to be elected governor of Texas in over 100 years, since 1870, representing the completion of Texas's shift away from traditional Southern Democrat interests and firmly into the Republican column. Notably, his 2 terms as governor coincided with Poppy Bush's time as vice president under Reagan and as president of the United States. Returning to Bill Clements and Poppy Bush's early alliance under Zapata Sedco, we can see again how Bush's arrival in Texas does appear to coincide with the emergence of the GOP as a dominant force in the state. Additionally, allying with Bush appeared to spell good fortunes for those who were chosen, as Bill Clements, at the time simply another oil tycoon.
Also, I forgot to mention, and so his father or grandfather, Prescott Bush. Don't forget, it was Prescott Bush who stole all of Tesla's paperwork. And remember, Donald Trump's family are friends with the Tesla family. And it was a lot of Tesla's work that Donald Trump's uncle, who died of something, I forget what it was, he was using Tesla's technology, the stuff that wasn't stolen by Prescott Bush, in the Department of Energy and for a college. I forget what college it was. And yeah, I think he was a part of the Manhattan Project. Like, this shit is insane. And let us not forget, it was the von der Leyen's and those Napoleon extants, whoever those assholes were that stole all of the Trump family's property in Germany, which caused him to flee the now German country to Scotland and America. And which coincidentally, if I'm not mistaken, Mel Gibson's great-grandfather or grandfather has had the same problem, because their vineyard, just like Donald Trump's family, they had a vineyard. That shit was stolen from them. Apparently, Mel Gibson's family had a vineyard in Australia, and it was part of around this when all of these fucking people that I've been showing you were doing what they were doing. They were robbing Trump's family. They were robbing Melania's family. They were robbing Mel Gibson's family. I'm just saying that as an example, but that's what they were doing. They stole their fucking property. They stole their vineyards. They stole their manufacturing companies. They stole their whatever other commodities, like, I don't know, salt, spices, whatever the fuck they bought from gypsies that someone else had stolen. This is why you have what you have going on. Everyone is getting back at each other.
And the Houston nexus would be elevated over the next decades to massive political prominence in lockstep with Poppy Bush. What remains so puzzling about Bush's move to Houston and his splintering from the main Zapata brand is that in the mid-1950s, Zapata's West Texas oil plot, courtesy of the Litkeys and Zapata landman John Overby, still contained a bounty of easy-to-extract oil for the taking, which the Litkey brothers continued to exploit with their Zapata Petroleum Company for the following years. Yet, as previously mentioned, Bush decided to completely step away from the profits. Zapata Offshore, Bush's offshoot firm with Clements, according to Joseph Trento, turned a small profit in 1955 and 56 before going into the red for over $500,000 in 1957 and 58. During this same time, as Bush's venture began hemorrhaging money from the Zapata Corporation, the Litkey brothers asked for a buyout, which Bush graciously provided to them to the tune of $800,000, allegedly provided by generous Uncle Herbie Walker. The Oklahoman brothers would then use this initial seed capital to merge Zapata with the Pennsylvania-based oil firm South Penn Oil to form the now well-known firm Pennzoil in 1963. Leaving Bush and the Zapata brand behind, the Litkeys became some of the richest men in the United States. To this day, Pennzoil is worth billions of dollars and would propel the brothers to unprecedented wealth and success, without Zapata co-founder George H.W. Bush. The only explanation for Bush's seeming aversion to profits and his unexplainable career sidestep is that Zapata Offshore was a CIA pet project, and that Bush was in turn providing corporate cover for intelligence assets. Soon enough, despite continuous losses, Russ Baker notes that Zapata Offshore had installed their state-of-the-art mobile offshore rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, the Persian Gulf, and off of the island of Borneo in Indonesia. Zapata Offshore's activities internationally strangely seem to coincide with the CIA's foreign activities as well. Indonesia, for example, where Bush's firm set up a rig in the late 50s, would succumb to foreign meddling when the CIA planned and undertook a failed coup there in 1957 and 58. This period also marked the beginning of Bush's long-standing relationship with the Gulf monarchies in the Middle East, renting one of the first offshore rigs to Kuwait Shell, the major oil producer in the small Gulf kingdom of Kuwait. And as we know today, Kuwait would become synonymous with Poppy Bush. As president, he would lead U.S. forces into Iraq during the First Gulf War, ostensibly in defense of neighboring Kuwait. But in the 1950s, some 40 years earlier, Zapata Offshore represented the first activation of Bush by Dulles as a proper intelligence asset. Not a spy per se, but a friendly and cooperative business contact,
yes,
under the watchful guidance of
Dulles. And this is after Dulles has already been invited to the tea shop. Dulles went to the same tea shop as Mussolini, fucking Hitler, that motherfucker who ran Africa, that black dude. They all go to this tea shop. And you remember Dulles was a homo. And he had a homo friend who was also just as gangster as his homo ass was. And they started what would become the downfall of JFK. And what's hilarious is after all is said and done, and Bush got all his accolades, the CIA named a building after him.
But a friendly and cooperative business contact under the watchful guidance of W.U. Briney Thomas Devine.
Hand off your taxes to an expert in your neighborhood. Now, your TurboTax expert can.
Joseph Trento relays a quote from former spy William Corson that Bush was, quote, perfect at talent spotting and looking at potential recruits for the CIA, end quote. Additionally, according to John Sherwood, a former top CIA agent under the head of the anti-Castro operations in 1962 and 63, stated that, quote, Bush was like hundreds of other businessmen who provided nuts and bolts assistance such operations require. He was no spy. None of these guys were. What they mainly helped us with was to give us a place to park people that was discreet. End quote. What Sherwood is describing here, and what I have started to explore through Thomas Devine's work in the Caribbean, has also been relayed by such figures as Victor Marchetti, a longtime CIA officer turned whistleblower, who I believe to be one of the more credible sources of insider information about the agency. As relayed in Jonathan Quitney's book, The Crimes of Patriots, Marchetti describes two types of quote-unquote purportedly private organizations that the CIA relies on in its work. The first is the CIA proprietary firm, a company that on the outside looks privately owned, but in reality is owned entirely by the agency. Quitney notes Paul Helliwell's companies in Southeast Asia as examples, principally Sea Supply Corp in Bangkok and Civil Air Transport, later Air America, as examples of proprietary firms. These quote-unquote companies on the surface look like privately owned entities, but in reality, the entire business is owned by the CIA and its partners directly. There are no private shareholders, and usually the entire seed capital is provided by the agency. Yet these companies do still perform the operations that they advertise, albeit for agency purposes. Sea Supply Corp did ship arms and other supplies to agency-backed Southeast Asian forces. CAT did operate as an airline. Marchetti notes that these proprietaries are allowed to spend their own profits however they choose, but could turn to Langley if they were in need of a cash infusion to buy new planes or weapons to be shipped to armies in the Golden Triangle. But it's the second type of CIA firm, which is described...
And isn't it odd that the Golden Circle is fighting the Golden Triangle?
as the quote-unquote CIA front, which appears to encompass such firms as Zapata Offshore. According to Quitney, a front is, quote, an organization whose purported business is a sham, kept in place to provide a cover for other activities, end quote. Or in other words, quote, it offers a place for agents to get mail or phone calls and provide an answer to otherwise embarrassing questions like, what are you doing here, end quote. Zapata Offshore, for example, was less concerned with drilling for oil and more focused on providing business cover for CIA assets. The reason I bring this up is because Poppy Bush and his cohort of agents, the core of which would end up at the center of the Iran-Contra affair at the end of their careers in the 80s, would be the pioneers of a new privatized and decentralized model of both intelligence funding and plausible deniability. Under ostensible corporate cover, spies were no longer spies. They were now businessmen. Bush was brought into this quote-unquote pilot project at the ground floor as an early purveyor of a CIA front. Throughout his career as an intelligence agent, Bush would work to expand this corporate intelligence web. As a politician, Bush would tap into this web to undertake some of the most widespread, diffuse, and highly criminal operations in CIA history. To better understand this model, let's investigate Bush's first exposure to the new quote-unquote pilot project devised by Dulles to bring private cover for CIA assets in the Caribbean. Poppy Bush would first cut his teeth in the anti-Castro operations, providing corporate cover for Cuban exiles, training to overthrow Fidel Castro in the lead up to the Bay of Pigs invasion. I should begin by noting that the CIA's official code name for the Bay of Pigs invasion was, interestingly, Operation Zapata, which cannot be written off as a mere coincidence given the alleged role of Bush's oil firm, Zapata Offshore, in the operation. Although Zapata Offshore continuously lost money starting in 1957, this did not prevent the company from expanding expanding throughout those years. Maybe the most conspicuous expansion was in 1958, at the beginning of the Cuban Revolution, to a small offshore plot off of Cay Sal Island, a minuscule Bahamian islet completely apart from the main archipelago. One quick note on Cay Sal that I was pointed towards by a Patreon supporter. The name Cay Sal roughly translates from Spanish to mean Salt Island, which itself ties into the salt theme that the agency appeared to be going for in regards to the W.U. Briney and W.U. Saline cryptonyms for Bush's Zapata project. The use of Cay Sal Island could have very well been the inspiration for those codenames. Cay Sal is located some 62 miles or 100 kilometers south of the Florida Keys, and only 31 miles or 50 kilometers north of Cuba. Its location made it an ideal staging ground for potential future amphibious invasions of Cuba.
The Cane's Box Combo, a symphony of flavors.
Hello, hello, hello. Sitcoms are back. How's that?
It turned out that Zapata Offshore...
Okay, I found it. Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird, Project HK Decoy, Project MK Delta, Project MK Naomi, Project MK Search, Project MK Ultra, Project MK Naomi, Project Naomi, Project Shade, Project Sugar, Project QK Hilltop, Project Pelican, Project Paperclip, like all these were going on at precisely the exact same time.
Released the plot next to Cay Sal from none other than billionaire Howard Hughes, who had himself leased Cay Sal a year earlier. According to a 1958 FBI memo, Hughes was reported to have leased Cay Sal from one Clarence O. Moody, who was reportedly Hughes' middleman in delivering support to the Cuban exiles. Hughes was completely embedded in the Zapata offshore operations in South Florida. The same FBI memo makes note of the location of the Zapata offshore offices in Marathon, Florida, right in the middle of the Florida Keys, a series of small islets jutting out of the southern tip of Florida. Not to get too far into the weeds here, but the Florida Keys were a hotspot for both official CIA and off-the-books anti-Castro training operations during this same period. Only a few miles west of Zapata's Marathon, Florida HQ is No Name Key, which would come to house one of the most famous privately funded Cuban exile training camps in the upcoming years. Many have speculated that what came to be known as the No Name Key Group was funded directly by Hughes in some way. We will come back to this later, as the No Name Key Group would later relocate to a rural Louisiana training camp, a camp that many have speculated trained Kennedy's future assassins. But besides Marathon, Florida's proximity to No Name Key, a hotbed of paramilitary activity, according again to the FBI memo, Marathon also housed what seemed to be a Howard Hughes front company known as the Pinellas Fish Company. The memo noted that the docks of this obscure fish company often served as a helipad for Hughes Tool Company helicopters. From the acquisition of the Cay Sal plot, to Zapata's proximity to No Name Key, to the closeness to Hughes front companies, Bush's CIA front activities appeared to intersect and complement Howard Hughes' private intel activities, exemplifying the benefits of an asset such as Bush to the boys at Langley. The CIA could more easily tap into private intelligence networks through these seemingly legitimate business relationships, such as the one between Hughes and Bush, without arousing suspicion by using outright CIA officers. But what was Zapata Offshore really accomplishing for the CIA? According to newspaper articles at the time, Cay Sal Islet was equipped with a small landing strip built on the island when it was previously used by the Bahamian Army as a training site some years earlier. These amenities would undoubtedly come in use, especially as I speculate that Cay Sal may have been used as one of the transshipment points for the CIA-backed arms traffickers out of Louisiana, who were shipping guns to both sides in the Cuban Revolution in the late 50s. As I covered previously in several videos, these weapons smugglers were concentrated around David Ferry and his Civil Air Patrol, with figures such as Jack Ruby and Barry Seal smuggling weapons, maybe even through the airstrip at Cay Sal. Howard Hughes' appearance in this nexus as the owner of Kay-Sal Island is of course significant, as he himself embodied a similar role to Bush, with his Hughes Enterprises and his airline TWA providing intelligence cover for agency-linked assets during this same period. I will remind you, for example, that CIA-linked smuggler Barry Seal worked later as a commercial pilot for Hughes TWA, likely using the job as cover. Notably, Poppy Bush himself may have corresponded with Howard Hughes all the way back in the late 40s and early 50s, when he was working for Uncle Mallin's Dresser Industries. As it turned out, Dresser had been in ongoing negotiations with Hughes Tool Company to buy their patented oil drill bit, the patent that had started the Hughes family fortune. These negotiations ultimately went nowhere, but we can convincingly draw the connection from Dresser's negotiations with Hughes to a decade later when the billionaire would rent his Kay-Sal plot to Poppy Zapata offshore. Bush would arrange for the installation of his rig, nicknamed Scorpion, off the coast of Kay-Sal in 1958. Researchers such as Joseph Trento and Russ Baker have speculated that Bush's Kay-Sal Scorpion rig was used as an impromptu training facility for Cuban exiles, many of which were given corporate cover either at Zapata offshore or in the Mexican oil company Pemex. This type of training, in my estimation, would have likely been for the most elite of the Cuban exiles, given the nature of amphibious exercises and the remote locale of this rig. I picture special operations forces, or maybe like future Navy SEAL type training when I think of offshore rigs. As I covered previously, the most elite of the Cuban exile crop were being funneled into the CIA's Operation 40 to serve as the future intelligence operators of a US-aligned Cuba. Many of these Op 40 agents would remain longtime CIA collaborators into the future.
1958 was fucking crazy.
Highlight this quote from Fabian Escalante, who I will say as a disclaimer was a high-ranking Castro intelligence agent. It is up to you whether his work for Castro brings credence to his statement or invalidates it. Anyways, I still want to share what he said because if what he said was true, then it adds an additional dimension to Bush's role in the Bay of Pigs. Escalante claimed that in the lead up to the invasion of Cuba, George H.W. Bush and his associate Jack Crichton, you'll remember him as the private Murchison-employed spook we covered earlier, worked to raise funds for the CIA's Operation 40 from the oil tycoons in Houston and Dallas, respectively. This statement, although unverifiable, is backed by some circumstantial evidence. Firstly, as I already covered, Bush's Scorpion rig off of Kay-Sal would have provided perfect training facilities for the Operation 40 assassins. Even on a personal level, Poppy appeared to have maintained close relations and even friendships with many of the CIA men and Cuban exiles that were circulating in this Operation 40 environment. Future CIA Director Porter Goss, who would be elevated to that role by Poppy's son, President George W. Bush, from 2004 to 2006, had started his career with the CIA working in the Caribbean, likely on anti-Castro operations. Interesting to see Porter Goss elevated by Poppy's son to the top job at CIA, when both likely first met in the Gulf of Mexico in the early 60s, and Goss, of course, has been highly rumored to have been involved with Operation 40. I'll remind you, some have speculated that he was in this picture that we covered in the Operation 40 video. Anyways, H.W. Bush would also remain lifelong friends with none other than Felix Rodriguez, the Cuban exile leader of the Operation 40 hit squad. As you can see in these photos, Bush even hosted Felix in the White House while he was vice president. You will remember I said earlier that Bush elevated the people he trusted throughout his career. Well, it may not be a coincidence that while Bush was vice president in the 1980s, Rodriguez would reemerge as a key player in Iran-Contra, specifically in the Salvadoran resupply operations. On screen now is supposedly a 1988 letter written by Bush to Rodriguez wishing him the best in his upcoming trial and expressing his certainty that he is innocent and not implicated in Iran-Contra. Now, the authenticity of this letter does remain in question, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was real. Bush's long-standing personal friendship with the head of Operation 40 does seem to, at the very least, indicate some interaction between the two during the height of the anti-Cuba show, maybe even on the Zapata Scorpion rig. As for private spy Jack Crichton, he had already cultivated deep political ties with pretty much every prominent oil man in Dallas. By this point, since 1956, Crichton had been heading the 488th Military Intelligence Department, a reservist outfit filled with Army intelligence reservists based in Dallas. Not to mention that Crichton was also the Dallas representative for the Empire Trust Company, the holding company of the Cuban-Venezuelan Oil Voting Trust Company, George de Morenschild's oil firm that held the rights to some 50% of the Cuban oil reserves pre-revolution, and were likely more than happy to donate funds to Crichton's alleged fundraising efforts for Operation 40. Rolling back communism in the Caribbean would become a new priority for the cowboy wildcatters, as it would open up new horizons and markets for exploitation. An often unspoken reason as to why these cowboys in the old China lobby favored a policy of rollback in the Cold War was because by rolling back socialism, these entrepreneurs would essentially unlock or quote-unquote open up new markets for exploitation. In Castro's Cuba, for example, the socialist government had worked to nationalize most of the natural resources once controlled by multinational corporations such as Standard Oil and United Fruit. The cowboys, traditionally excluded from these old imperialist multinational trusts of the early 20th century, could therefore finally get their piece of the colonial pie from the remains of the rolled back socialist economy. This represented a significant reason as to why the cowboys were such strong advocates for rollback. It would in turn allow them to expand into overseas markets that were open to reprivatization. It should also go without saying, therefore, that the Texas oil independents were strong advocates of the Nixon-Dulles anti-Castro policies, not only from an ideological perspective, but from an economic perspective too. Cuba had just been scouted as a potential oil-producing country when Batista was overthrown in 1959, and the few wells that had been erected were subsequently nationalized. It was unclear what Cuba's reserves truly held, and to the Texas cowboys, it appeared that Cuba's oil wealth could be a new East Texas field for the tycoons. Regardless of the legitimacy of Castro's spy chief Escalante's claim about Bush and Crichton being covert CIA fundraisers for the Bay of Pigs and Operation 40, the connections between both men does indicate at the very least a working relationship. Some 4 years after their rumored collaboration, in 1964, Bush and Crichton would conspicuously appear on the same electoral ballot, Bush running for U.S. Senate, and Crichton running for governor of Texas, both as Republicans. The two men would be defeated handedly in the post-JFK assassination blue wave. Bush by Democratic Senator Ralph Yarborough, and Crichton by LBJ protege Governor John Connally, the man who shared a bullet with Kennedy. Bush and Crichton also shared a common acquaintance, the ubiquitous George de Mohrenschildt. After Russian George's death by apparent suicide in April 1977, weeks before he was set to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and a couple of months after Bush ended his stint as CIA director, investigators found in the deceased de Mohrenschildt's Rolodex a number and address associated with George H.W. Bush himself, noted there as the president of Zapata Offshore. De Mohrenschildt had even written a letter to Bush while he was CIA director in 1976, asking him if he could, quote, bring a solution into the hopeless situation I find myself in, end quote. That hopeless situation was likely an upcoming questioning by the House Select Committee on Assassinations regarding George and his wife Jean de Mohrenschildt's spontaneous friendship with Lee Harvey Oswald and his Russian wife Marina in late 1962 and into early 1963, a little under a year before the assassination of JFK.
Looking for tax help? Now there are TurboTax experts right in your...
Oh yeah.
Mohrenschildts had even been the ones to introduce the Oswalds to Ruth Paine, the woman who would help Lee get a job at the now iconic Texas School Book Depository, where he allegedly shot the president. Now, I could go much deeper into this relationship between the Russian oil tycoon and the reportedly loser drifter Oswald, but I'll save it for another time. What I will leave you with as we leave de Mohrenschildt is the proposition that the two Georges, de Mohrenschildt and Bush, were likely serving a similar purpose to the CIA in the Caribbean. Both were oil and gas executives that traveled across the Caribbean in connection with ongoing intrigue. Russ Baker points out, for example, that the de Mohrenschildts happened to be taking a quote-unquote walking trip through Guatemala just as the Bay of Pigs invaders of Brigade 2506 were undergoing their training at base tracks. Could they have been a part of the same Allen Dulles pilot project, planting CIA assets into the oil industry as covert assets? They both seem to have served a similar role, with Bush admittedly achieving greater heights, especially after his critical role as a paymaster and cover asset for the Bay of Pigs invasion. What remains certain to me is that George Bush, the upstart oil executive from the Northeast, was clearly involved in intelligence operations far before his reported start at the CIA, when he was appointed as director all the way in 1976. Hell, I didn't even mention the often had faced a near-universal green light from President Eisenhower for the bulk of his tenure. The young Kennedy was different. He required explanation and transparency, two qualities that made the spooks, especially Allen Dulles, uncomfortable. The question that is often raised surrounding the Bay of Pigs fiasco is that of air support. It appears that Dulles knew that his plan to send 1,500 or so ragtag exiles to undertake a full-on amphibious assault on Cuba and to establish a pro-US government in arms was a pipe dream.
And Dulles, again, does this from Nicaragua, which is one of the OG headquarters for these Golden Circle people. And it never stops with these people.
He did, after all, smoke a pipe. But it did remain a pipe dream unless, of course, the president ordered air support, firstly to destroy Castro's small but competent suite of planes while they were grounded, and then to provide direct support to his landing party. Under old General Eisenhower, Dulles knew that he had a supportive president that would provide anything to complement his policy goals. I mean, he was working with Vice President Nixon at the time at the top of the Bay of Pigs planning staff. This was a complementary effort. Yet under Kennedy, air support was not so certain. The idealistic JFK did not want to reveal an American hand in the invasion, and Dulles knew this. So he took a gamble. He told Kennedy that the invasion would not require air support, and that Castro did not have pilots for his planes. These were both lies. He hoped that he could pressure the young president to take a decisive action when push came to shove, and to guarantee victory. In many ways, this could have been a test by the elder spy master.
And we know how that ended. All right, last video. Oops.
More than 60,000 armed Christians were on their way to reclaim Jerusalem from the infidel.
Between 1095 and 1291 AD, the Pope launched 7 bloodbaths called the Christian Crusades, torturing, burning, beheading, and mass murdering hundreds of thousands of Muslims and Jews in the name of God. The Pope's brutal soldiers were called Knights Templar, or Knights of the Temple of Solomon, and evolved into today's secretive brotherhood called the Freemasons. Between 1450 and 1700 AD, the Catholic Church followed up their holy terror with the Inquisition. Based on rumors of practicing witchcraft, the Catholic Church hunted down, tortured, and burned alive millions of innocent women at the stake.
Is to emerge the one truth.
World War II, the Vatican was criticized for supporting Hitler and his Nazi regime. To this day, the Vatican is still under investigation for plundering Nazi gold from the Swiss bank accounts of Jewish Holocaust victims. Over the past 5 decades, more than 1,500 priests and bishops have been identified in the sexual assault of tens of thousands of boys and girls in their trusting congregations and orphanages. Why is this filthy rich institution preaching spiritual values of poverty and chastity while cardinals, bishops, and priests cover up their crimes of sexual abuse? Why has the Church fought and resisted the compensation claims of their sexually, emotionally, and spiritually traumatized victims? Like Vatican City, London's inner city is also a privately owned corporation or city-state, located right smack in the heart of Greater London. It became a sovereign state in 1694 when King William III of Orange privatized and turned the Bank of England over to the bankers. By 1812, Nathan Rothschild crashed the English stock market and scammed control of the Bank of England. Today, the city-state of London is the world's financial power center and the wealthiest square mile on the face of the earth. It houses the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England, Lloyd's of London, the London Stock Exchange, all British banks, the branch offices of 385 foreign banks, and 70 U.S. banks. It has its own courts, its own laws, its own flag, and its own police force. It's not part of Greater London or England or the British Commonwealth and pays no taxes. The city-state of London houses Fleet Street's newspaper and publishing monopolies. It is also the headquarters for worldwide English Freemasonry and headquarters for the worldwide money cartel known as the Crown. Contrary to popular belief, the Crown is not the royal family or the British monarch. The Crown is the private corporate city-state of London. It has a council of 12 members who rule the corporation under a mayor called the Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor and his 12-member council serve as proxies or representatives who sit in for 13 of the world's wealthiest, most powerful banking families. This ring of 13 ruling families includes the Rothschild family, the Warburg family, the Oppenheimer family, and the Schiff family. These families and their descendants run the Crown Corporation of London. The Crown Corporation holds the title to worldwide Crown land in Crown colonies like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The British Parliament and the British Prime Minister serve as a public front for the hidden power of these ruling Crown families. Like the city-state of London and the Vatican, a third city-state was officially created in 1982. That city-state is called the District of Columbia and is located on 10 square miles of land in the heart of Washington. The District of Columbia flies its own flag and has its own independent constitution. Although geographically separate, the city-states of London, the Vatican, and the District of Columbia are one interlocking empire called Empire of the City. The flag of Washington's District of Columbia has 3 red stars, one for each city-state in the 3-city empire. This corporate empire of 3 city-states controls the world economically through London's inner city, militarily through the District of Columbia, and spiritually through the Vatican. The Constitution for the District of Columbia operates under a tyrannical Roman law known as Lex Fori, which bears no resemblance to the U.S. Constitution. When Congress passed the Act of 1871, it created a separate corporate government for the District of Columbia. This treasonous act allowed the District of Columbia to operate as a corporation outside the original Constitution of the United States and outside of the best interests of American citizens. A sobering study of the signed treaties and charters between Britain and the United States exposes a shocking truth. The United States has always been, and still is, a British Crown colony. King James I was famous not for just changing the Bible into the King James Version, but for signing the First Charter of Virginia in 1606. That charter granted America's British forefathers a license to settle and colonize America. The charter also guaranteed that future kings and queens of England would have sovereign authority over all the citizens and colonized land in America stolen from the Indians. After America declared its independence from Great Britain, the Treaty of 1783 was signed. That treaty specifically identifies the King of England as the Prince of the United States and contradicts the belief that America won the War of Independence. Although King George III of England gave up most of his claims over his American colonies, he kept his right to continue receiving payment for his business venture of colonizing America. If America had really won the War of Independence, they would never have agreed to pay debts and reparations to the King of England. When Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the U.S. President was made subservient to the King of England. The 13th Amendment is called the Title of Nobility Amendment and forbids U.S. presidents and their officials from using royal titles like king or prince or baron. For some mysterious reason, the 13th Amendment, which was ratified in 1810, no longer appears on current copies of the Constitution. America's blood-soaked War of Independence against the British bankrupted America and turned its citizens into permanent debt slaves of the king. In the War of 1812, the British torched and burned to the ground the White House and all U.S. government buildings and destroyed ratification records of the U.S. Constitution. 1 century later, a corrupt U.S. Congress committed the biggest theft in world history. They passed Paul Warburg's Federal Reserve Act in 1913, handing over America's gold and silver reserves and total control of America's economy to the Rothschild banksters. Most Americans still believe that the Fed or Federal Reserve is the government. It is not. The Fed is a privately owned banking system whose majority Class A shareholders are the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Kuhn and Loeb, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Israel Seif, and the Lehman Brothers. This private banking cartel is the Fed and is never audited and never pays taxes. They print and design America's money, which displays their symbols of an Egyptian pyramid, a Masonic all-seeing eye, and the words "In God We Trust." Who exactly is the God they trust? They also collect American taxpayers' money through the IRS. Then they loan it back again with interest to pay for roads, bridges, and other public works. American presidents are handpicked and financed by these special interest power groups. Like George W. Bush, John Forbes Kerry, whose initials are JFK, is a member of Yale University's Skull and Bones Brotherhood. The Forbes part of John Kerry's name identifies his descendancy from Captain Robert Bennett Forbes, who was a drug runner for the Rothschilds' opium drug trade with China in the 1800s. Most U.S. citizens believe that the United States is a country and that the President is the most powerful man on earth. The United States is not a country. It is a corporation, and the President is President of the Corporation of the United States. He and his elected officials work for the corporation, not for the American people. Since the United States is a corporation, who owns the corporation of the United States? Like Canada and Australia, whose leaders are prime ministers of the Queen, and whose land is called Crown Land, the United States is just another Crown colony. Crown colonies are controlled by the empire of 3 city-states. At the center of each city-state is a towering, phallic-shaped stone monument called an obelisk that points skyward. In D.C. city-state, the obelisk, known as the Washington Monument, was dedicated to Freemason George Washington by the Freemason Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia.
There you go, TJ. I did this all for you. You never get rid of them, England, What do you mean? Get rid of who? Anyway, That's all. Globetrotters. Rest in peace, Chuck Norris. Rest in